that's it.
I think that's great. PCREIA is a great organization. We really try to do everything we can to support our local real estate investors. And with that in mind, I just want to say a quick thing about our mission statement, because that'll get us all on the same page so you know exactly where we're coming from our heart in regards to our mission. Here at PCREIA, we're not just about fundamentals of strategies and funding of real estate and finding deals and so on. We are all about the people. We're all about fellow investors, the tenants, sellers, community. Through real estate investing, we get to do amazing things. We really love real estate investing as a career. We love the people that we're interacting with. What other kind of business can you change neighborhoods, change people's lives, support and help people that have real financial or real estate problems they're facing, and you can become wealthy doing it? I mean, that is like an amazing thing we found here. So I just want you to know that from our world to yours, we love real estate investing. We invite you in. We really create a corporate culture of total support. We live by do no harm, truly share and support each other. We're totally focused on member support and quality education. That's why we're bringing you such a great evening like tonight with John Schaub. And by the way, in regards to our meetings, I just want to remind you, you will always find all of our meetings posted on all the emails that I send out. Or if you're a member, you get to come to quite a few meetings. If you're not a member, we have this free meeting once a month at the first Thursday of every month. But if you're a member, we have noon meetings, like we have one coming up October 8th and on the 22nd at noon. It's just a quick 1 hour connection. And then we have a hot topics evening on October 15th at 6:30 p.m. And that's a great evening sometimes we have a speaker and sometimes we don't. It's a great interaction for everybody to share. And at all of those member meetings, you can offer up deals. That's where you start to really connect with local investors and property owners, etc. Those are great meetings to be involved in. We also have something called the Lakeland Note Investing that Susan Collins runs. Susan, are you here tonight? Can you tell folks when the next meeting is? Susan is...
Yes, I'm trying to mute myself because I'm using my cell phone.
Okay, there you are. Okay, tell us about your meeting, Susan.
Absolutely. It's the second Tuesday of the month. It's the 13th in October, and it's at 6 p.m. It's for beginners. Or selling a note, or just interested in creating notes, or just wants to check it out. We just talk about creating notes, A to Z, anything you'd like to know about it. If you just want to come and check it out, you're welcome to. That 6 p.m. It's the Lakeland Note Meetup. If you want to check it out on Meetup, also that's what you'll find it under, Lakeland Note Meetup, and it's at 6 p.m. the second Tuesday of every month.
Okay, great. Yeah, you'll always see it on our emails that we send out, so you can find the dates and information quickly. Thanks a lot, Susan. Those are great meetings, by the way. And I think you'd really enjoy them if you try them out. Also, let's see, Adrian, if you would, well, I tell you what, let's do this. We have a couple of, let's see, let's do this. Where's the disclaimer, Adrian? Let's make our lawyer happy. We like to make our lawyer happy. Yes. There's some good reading for you. I know y'all want to read that word for word. I'm not going to bother you while you do. And Adrian, if you want to give us a short synopsis of what that disclaimer actually says for us.
Do your own homework, trust but verify, and we're not accountants, we're not giving legal advice, finance advice, anything like that. That's the cliff notes of it. There you go. And we are not liable for absolutely anything. There you go. Yeah, that's all right. That's the most important thing. Especially I'm not liable. Hello. Yeah, especially not me, but maybe Adrian, I'm not sure. Okay, great to have you all. Let's talk about our corporate sponsors that you've been seeing the banners going over. These are the folks that support you in your efforts to be a real estate investor. We believe that real estate investing is a team effort, okay? It takes a team effort to be successful. And so these corporate sponsors pay a little bit more so that they assist us in being able to have these meetings for you guys.
Also, I tell folks all the time, we're a small enough organization here in Polk County that if these corporate sponsors aren't doing good things for all of us as investors, then you hear about it very quickly, and they don't stay on this little round circle of banners very long. So if you see them up here, these are people that many of us, most of us have used and we find to be very valuable. And at the beginning of all of our meetings, we try to give any of those corporate sponsors just a moment to say hi to you if they're actually here at our meeting. And tonight we have an announcement, I guess. Let's see, do you have the banner yet, Adrian, or not yet?
Yep, I have it.
Okay, we have a brand new corporate sponsor that we want to say hello to and have her tell us a little bit about herself and say hi to everybody. Shannon Cornell. Where are you, Shannon? There you are.
I'm right here. Good evening, everyone.
Hi.
I'm Shannon Cornell. I'm the broker owner of PMI Erico Realty and Property Management. I'm one of 275 franchises throughout the United States and in a couple countries, and we provide property management services to investors and owners, and currently managing just under 200 units.
Excellent. Wow. We are great to have you on here. You came highly recommended by Adrian. He said he's actually known you before you signed up, and he likes you. So this is a big deal. So we're glad to have you. Really glad to have you, Shannon. Now, is there anybody else, any other corporate sponsors that are on tonight? Adrian, I can't. Oh, Frank Popo. Hey, Frank. Tell us something, Frank. What do we need to know from you tonight?
Well, my wife and I own Equity Title here in Lakeland. We can do closings for any property that you have in the state of Florida, anywhere in the world. We now have remote closings. We've never shut down through this COVID thing, so we keep moving on. So we have a girl working for us that speaks Spanish, so there really shouldn't be anything to hold you up. We're investor experienced, really investor experienced, to be honest with you. We've been doing it since 2002, so I guess that's pretty good. Anyway.
Very good.
Yeah. We're specialized in mobile home closings, as well as the other closings. So if you need title insurance, or you should have it. If you don't, if you're really gambling, our phone number is 863-802-9300, or you can email Sue at equity-title.com or Cindy at equity-title.com. Thanks a lot.
Very good. Good to have you here tonight. And a big key of what Frank just said is he's a fellow investor. So this is somebody that is going through all the same things you and I are in all of our investing antics. And he's somebody that can help you out through that process when it comes to titles. So we appreciate you, Frank. We really do. Thank y'all.
If I can answer anyone's questions, hang on a second.
Yeah.
If I can answer anyone's questions, give me a call. Give me my cell phone. It's 863-529-7553. I'll help you any way I can.
Good. Thank you, Frank. Appreciate that. Okay, let's see. Anybody else that we've got on here? I don't think I see anybody. Do you, Adrian? Right now in this moment?
No.
Okay, very good.
No, Rosemary. Rosemary's on here now.
Oh, Rosemary, are you here?
Yeah. Let me see, find her.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi. How are you, Rosemary? Tell us about something.
So I'm Rosemary. I'm a mobile notary for those that need somebody to either do your mortgage closings for those titles company. And I'm also bilingual. So if you need somebody that needs to go out there and you can't make it, even if you have in-house staff, I'm your go-to person. I'm in the process of becoming an investor. So I'm learning everything I can. And I soon should be offering permit running services as well. So if you're an investor and you want to have some permits done for you, I'm your go-to person. What else? I'm trying to think what else.
I don't know. That sounds like a lot. You're covering almost everything we need there, right?
Pretty much. So yeah, I do that. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. As of right now, I'm trying to concentrate mostly, of course, Polk County, part of Hillsborough County, like Plant City, but I do go as far as any part in Hillsborough, Pinellas, Pasco, and Polk County. So I do have
Very
business cards
good.
with my name on it. Yes, I just put that kind of generic because it has kind of the stuff I do offer. But Frank, I could actually send you a copy of my business card electronically if you want.
Yeah, email it
And
over to me.
And Adrian, I saw one of your little My Buys homes. A friend of mine was like, "Oh my God, there's like I know him."
Yeah, I started
I'm like,
putting them out again.
yeah, she actually showed me I guess a flyer that not a flyer, a postcard that you send out. So I was like, yeah, I know that person. But yeah,
It's
so
a
that's
small
me.
world.
It is.
Send me
Here,
over the
especially here
new
in
banner.
Colorado.
Send me over the new banner. I just put an email in the chat.
Okay.
I'll get updated.
Okay, so is that all we have for corporate sponsors tonight, you think, Adrian? Are we good on that?
Unless I'm missing someone, if we are, speak up.
Yeah, please speak up anytime. All right, one thing I want to make a couple of announcements real quick is in regards to evictions. A couple of folks have called me this week and asked if any evictions were happening. And Adrian and I actually, we do know of a few investors who have gotten a couple of evictions through recently. Adrian told me one and that went through here in Polk County for non-payment. And then I found out one that went through for other lease-related things. So we're not going to talk about that right now tonight, but I just wanted you to know it sounds like maybe evictions are starting to open up here for us. Don't know all the specifics yet, but we're going to try to find out some more. So we'll discuss that at one of...
And I know you don't want to get into it too much, but from everything I read, the Florida released the, whatever the, what's the word for it? They released it, but the federal government has something there. So it's getting better if you need to do it.
Yeah, and the other part of that was that here specifically in Polk County anyway, the sheriffs were not delivering the writs. And so regardless of what was happening with the judge, even if the judge signed it, they were not delivering it. Well, maybe they are. I haven't called them. I'm going to call them, though, tomorrow and find out where we're at with all of that, just so we know. But right now we know that a couple got through, and I just wanted you all to know that.
And Shannon just said she just had one that was filed before COVID finally happened yesterday. So, I mean, she's a good resource.
Oh, is that right, Shannon?
She deals with more than all of us here, so.
Now, Shannon, was that for non-payment of rent?
It was for non-payment of rent, and it was filed with the attorney before COVID, and they were finally able to get it through.
Wow.
But my attorney that I use on a regular basis, Harry Heist, he's saying to charge late fees and to do 3-day notices again. Like, we're able to do that even with the CDC moratorium.
Oh, really? You're doing the 3-day notice?
Yeah, my office is actually starting that again as of October 1st. But yes, he actually said halfway through last month that we were able to start doing it again.
I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but I'm going to be selfish and ask a quick question, Shannon. Do you believe we should send out a letter saying we are now going to start sending 3-day notices out? Because I've heard Harry say before, if you're not doing something for so long, you need to tell them you are now going to start doing it.
So I never really told them that I wasn't doing late fees. So I am not sending that letter out, but the ones that have been the problem children over this time, they're going to see it. So.
Okay. Thank you.
But
Thank
honestly,
you, Liz, for letting me interrupt.
I haven't had as many problems as I actually anticipated. I only had about 1 to 2% of my portfolio that was actually affected.
It's good to hear.
Now, that's a very important thing to say right there, because for all you newbies on here, the market changes, the world changes, stuff happens. But what we know, Shannon, from our previous meetings here at Polk County, that at least with us and our group and the people who've shared with us, we've had very little problems. I mean, it's really shocking how little problem we've had through this whole thing with the landlords and
I don't
sort of
think
thing.
it's shocking, because I think most people that come to PCREIA treat their tenants with, I'll say, some respect and not like crap. So that's why we have good communication, and that's why we actually get rents and people want to pay. But I don't actually think it's that shocking.
Even across the United States with other property managers, I've been hearing the 1% to 2%. Now there's
Really?
been some where they've had 10 or 12%, but not 50% like I was anticipating. And
Right,
So
right.
the media blew something out of proportion.
How is
Sorry.
that possible? Okay, get off
Sorry.
now. Here we go. So I also want to point out some upcoming events that are happening. One is David Tilney tomorrow, his hassle-free property management and master leasing. It's an online seminar. It's going to be October 2nd through the 4th. There was a link to his event that's on that email that I last sent you. And then also we have something very exciting coming up. October 17th. Yes, October 17th. I want to point out, speaking of Adrian Smood, Adrian, our very own Adrian, is going to have his first ever webinar. Yes, he's going to be teaching. And listen, we've watched Adrian and his wife start out, you know, with almost nothing as far as investing, certainly, and then grow until now. Very successful. He doesn't like to brag, but he's got 30 or more doors. I mean, we're talking about a young couple that really have been walking the walk, talking the talk, walking the walk. They've been doing it, and they've been successful at it. And now he's getting ready to share some of his information. What are you going to be sharing with us on October 17th, Adrian?
It's going to be our process of how we find long-term tenants and keep them. Basically, most of you guys on here that know me, I go to tons of these classes. I'll be at Dave Tilney's again. I'll be at Pete and John's next weekend. And we've created our own process that we just took bits and pieces from everyone. And I like to say we add a little bit of technology to it. And we can pretty much manage our properties, find our tenants with very little in-person work, but we're still meeting them because I don't believe that it should all be automated where you never see and meet the tenant. So I'm going to be sharing our process of how we're doing it and from what we're actually doing today in a webinar.
Well, and I want to point out something that you didn't say, which is very important, I think. Not only is he going to share with you this, but Adrian is very proud of the fact that he's like the ultimate lazy landlord. He does not want to work super hard. He wants to play hard and have fun in life. He does not want to work hard. So this guy has found a way to manage these 30 or more properties and spend how much time per week do you do this and look for new properties?
Well, the look for new property is definitely a little bit more time, but
well, yeah, all the time.
The landlording side of it, I'd say it's on average is 30 minutes a week. It's about 30 minutes. 30
minutes a week. Think about that. And that's finding tenants and taking applications and everything.
We have one out there right now for rent, and we have received to actual ring on our phone 0 calls, which means our process is working. We've gotten tons of calls to the voicemail, meaning that they're disqualifying themselves. So it's saved us a lot of time.
Yes, he's got a lot of secrets and tips to share to make all this process super easy for somebody. And this whole thing, it costs $49 that he's going to be teaching us on October the 17th. It's a Saturday. So you'll find that link also in our emails. We encourage you to come join us with Adrian. I know I'm going to be there. I've already learned things from Adrian. He steals things from all the classes he goes to, and he proudly tells about it and gives them credit for it. So it's all good. And anyway, it's going to be a great day on Saturday. And then John Schaub and our speaker tonight and our good friend Pete Fortunato are going to be having their class on October 10th and 11th, live in person. They are daring it all and going out there and doing it live. John will tell us more about that a little bit later as we go. So now let's get this party started, please. So let me tell you just short, quick thing on John Schaub. Years and years ago, John would very kindly come to PCREIA meetings and share his information. And it has been years since we've been able to have him. He travels all over the country, and he's an extremely busy guy. So we are so excited to have him back here tonight. He's 40 plus years as an investor, full-time investor. He manages his own portfolio, so he's like one of us. He's actually has hands-on managing his portfolio. He's acquired more than 100 properties without ever going to a bank or getting hard money loans. So this is somebody that can teach us something. And if you're like me, one of your favorite books is a book that John wrote. It's highly rated. It's one of the best-selling books. It's called Building Wealth, One House at a Time. And I have to tell you, when I first saw John, one of the greatest things that he gave me was when he taught to a bunch of us. He didn't know he was giving me so much that night. But what he gave me that night was when he said, building wealth one house at a time. It kind of took the pressure off of me, John, because I would go to these meetings and people would say, oh, I did 5 deals, I did 20 deals, I bought 40 houses. I mean, all this craziness. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've got all this to live up to. I've got so much I have to do. I have to get so many houses. But you calmed that all down for me, John. You let me know, look, you can build wealth one house at a time. And that was incredibly important to me, and I thank you for it. And if everybody will please welcome John Schaub here to our meeting tonight. Yay.
Yay, thank you, Liz.
Okay.
You need a little calming down sometimes.
Oh.
Don't we all, though? Don't we all? Well,
yes.
Welcome to all my friends from Imperial Polk County. I used to live in Lakeland, but it's been a long time ago. I was 5 years old, so I moved over here when I was 6. I've been in Sarasota ever since. My dad grew up in Miami and in Tampa, so we've been in Florida for generations, and I still have a lot of good friends in Lakeland. So we've been in the business here in Sarasota since I graduated from college. And when I was in college up at the University of Florida, I got my real estate license when I turned 21 and got out of school not long after that. But I managed a little apartment building up here, a 6-unit building. And when I say managed, you know, I was the guy who was mowing the grass and painting the inside and unplugging the stopped up plumbing, that kind of stuff. I was a college kid doing all the grunt work. But I got lucky. A fellow showed up one day while I was over there mowing the grass and said, is this building for sale? And I said, sure. I knew everything was for sale. So I said, let me put you in touch with the owner. And they got together. He bought the building and the owner paid me a commission. So I made $5,000 while I was in college. And that was a lot of money when I was in college. And I immediately went out and blew it on flying lessons and playing golf and having fun. But when I got out of school, I got into real estate. And actually, I started teaching classes right away. There was a group called the Burt Rogers School of Real Estate. And Burt lived here in Sarasota, and I'd taken his class. He used to teach a class to get your license. So the first class I ever taught was for Burt Rogers, and I was teaching people how to get a real estate license. And that was the first public speaking I ever did. I never saw myself as a public speaker. But I enjoyed it, and I taught that class 4 or 5 times and really got good at it after a while and really learned the material. You know, that's one thing you learn about teaching. If you're a teacher, if you teach somebody to do something, and I don't care if it's fish or play tennis or fly an airplane or drive a car or dribble a baseball or basketball, you know, you get better at it because you have to think about how you do it before you teach somebody else to do it. So just a little sidetrack there, but anyway, I found that I like real estate. I've always considered myself in the money business. You know, the reason we invest in real estate is to make money. But over the years, we learned that we have provided a real service for a lot of families. We provided houses for hundreds of families in this town. And our tenants, as Adrian's pointing out, our tenants like us. I just got off the phone here not long ago with one of my tenants, and I broke Adrian's rule. I probably spent more than 15 minutes on the phone with her. So that's, you know, my time is up this week. I can't work anymore, I guess. But, you know, I like my tenants. My tenants like me. This lady's been with us about 14 or 15 years. My average tenant has been with us more than 10. The longest term tenant's been with us more than 30 years. And so by buying properties that attract long-term tenants, you know, just to keep it really simple, if people stay with you for a longer period of time, as a landlord, you work less. So Adrian's got the secret, you know, get people to stay there for a while and you don't have to work as much. And if you can get them to do some work or supervise some work for you, so you don't have the total maintenance responsibility, and we give our people a discount for doing the first $100 a month in maintenance, that keeps my phone from ringing. So we've learned a lot of things over the years. You know, I've managed my own properties, always have managed my own properties here in town. Now, I have to tell you, I've owned properties in 10 states. I've owned different kinds of properties. And what I've learned is that it's better to have things close to you. So today, all my properties are here in Sarasota. They're all single family houses. They didn't used to be. I started off by buying duplexes and apartment buildings, had a motel, had some commercial stuff. I had a little bit of everything because when I first started, my mindset was let's buy something that has cash flow, because when I first started, I had no money. So I would buy things that had high leverage. You know, if you have no money, you can't put much down. In fact, one of my students wrote a book called Nothing Down. Some of you have probably read it. It's a good book. His name is Bob Allen. He lives out in California now. But you know, the problem with Nothing Down is you owe the whole amount. So you have to be pretty clever the way you finance a property if you buy it with high leverage. Plus, you have to be a pretty good manager, because I can remember my first apartment building, and when I went over there to collect a rent, there were 9 units in this building. If I didn't collect all 9 rents, I couldn't make my payment. You know, I only had one payment, right? Apartment building, but it was a big payment, and I had to collect all 9 rents each month to collect that, to be able to make that payment. Well, my tenants thought I was loaded, right? Because I owned this 9-unit apartment building. What they didn't know was, you know, I might have had a little bit of equity in that building, but I had no cash flow to speak of, and it took some work. I went through this transition. I bought a lot of properties. I had a bunch of duplexes and houses, and mostly smaller houses, mostly lower rent houses, because, you know, when you buy a house for a lot less money, kind of the low end of the scale, the rents are higher as a percentage of the value. So you do have more gross cash flow. But what you learn over time is you have to work more. I woke up one day and I probably had 50 or 60 tenants, and every one of them was required a little bit of attention. You know, they were apartment tenants, they were duplex tenants, and they were commercial tenants. And for those of you that are not in the commercial business, aren't you happy you're not in the commercial business this week? There's a lot of empty commercial space here. And I managed a little strip center at that time. And what I noticed was small businesses and little strip centers go out of business all the time. And you've all heard that the small businesses rarely succeed, and it's absolutely true. Most of them just barely get by. Most of them struggle to pay the rent, and there's a lot of turnover. They're in and out a lot. So you have much more of a turnover situation in those businesses. And then if you know, my fantasy one day was to have one big building, right? Just one big building, one tenant, and how swell that would be. And then Sears goes broke, and Montgomery Ward's goes broke, and a lot of big people go broke. And I said, man, I'm really happy that I don't own a Sears store right now, or a shopping center that has Sears as a tenant, because what a problem that would be to try to replace people, especially in this environment. So we've kind of worked our way into building wealth one house at a time over the years. I still have the first house I ever bought. I bought it in 1973, and that's the house that's had the tenant in it for more than 30 years. And the houses have been very good to me. I live in a town, you know, not far from Lakeland, that is growing, and I know Lakeland is growing. So if you live in a town that's picking up population, and you know, Florida has really benefited in a kind of a strange way from this virus, because the people in the big cities are fleeing the big cities, and especially the ones with kids, they want to get out of there, and many of them are coming to Florida. And I know this because there was 2 people in my neighborhood that have moved from New York City to my neighborhood just in the last 4 or 5 months. And that's really interesting, because that's a pretty small neighborhood. There's only 100 houses in my neighborhood. So people are moving here. And the effect of that, especially when people come from places like New York City and some of the big cities up north, they come down here with a lot of money, and our prices look really, really cheap to them. So they're easy to sell to, you know, and they're driving prices up. Who would have guessed, you know, if you go back to January, I wrote a newsletter in early February and published it the 1st of March, you know, right as the virus was coming out. But in that newsletter, I talked about the change that was coming. And I didn't even think about the virus. I have a mastermind group that gets together in Colorado, Snowmass, Colorado once a year. And we were together the first week of February, and we went around the room right before we adjourned. And the question was, what do you think the rest of the year is going to be like? And about half the people were really nervous. They said, we don't know what's going to happen. but we think there's going to be some black swan event that nobody predicts that's really going to change things. And I'd already written my newsletter by then. But my feeling was, because we've had this real run up in prices, and it's continued, of course, since then, that at some point the run up will slow down. You know, that's what happens. There are cycles in every business. They're caused by people getting greedy. They're caused by lenders making bad loans. They're caused by a lot of different things. But at the end of that cycle, there'll be a change. And, you know, I won't be surprised at all if the stock market turns around and goes the other way. And I won't be surprised if we have a recession that affects real estate sometime the next year or two. If you're in the business and you've been in the business for a while, you've seen recessions. I think I've been through 7 recessions now. So I'm kind of, you know, I'm kind of ready for the next one. I've been ready really for the last 5 or 6. The first one caught me. If this is your first recession, you want to be careful because here's what happens, in case you don't know. You lose some of your tenants. Some of your tenants lose their jobs. Some of their tenants move in with their folks, you know, they move in with another family. You find that lenders stop making loans, and that really accelerates the downward spiral in prices, because if nobody can get a loan to buy a house and somebody has to sell, they have to reduce their price to sell it because they have to find an all cash buyer. So when we have these deep recessions where lenders quit lending money, and investors can't borrow money, prices go down. It just makes sense. And when that happens, of course, those are real opportunities for the people in the business who have access to cash. And as Liz pointed out, when I first started here, I've never gone to a bank to borrow money. And there's a couple reasons for that. And it's not that I just don't like bankers. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are bankers. But the reason is the banks can't move fast enough for me. And if you're just starting out, you know, if you don't have any money and you don't have a lot of income and you don't have established credit, they won't make you a loan anyway. And that's where I started without any of those things. Once you get some income and once you start buying a bunch of property, you wake up one day and now you own 10 or 20 properties, and you go down to the bank and say, I've got all this net worth and I've got all this income. And they say, well, you own too much stuff. We won't lend you any money now. So it's kind of catch-22. If you don't have any money, they won't lend you money. If you have too much property, they won't lend you money. And the other side of it is when you find a really good deal, when you find somebody who needs to sell something and they need to sell this week, you can't go to a bank and get the loan closed this week. So the person who's going to make that deal is going to be somebody who knows a way to buy that house without going to the bank. So we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. Peter Fortunato is one of my best friends. We've been friends since 1973, so we go way back. All our kids kind of grew up together, and we've been teaching together and going to each other's seminars. Pete sponsored one of our first classes back in '75 or '76, so we go way back. And and if you haven't heard Peter speak, he's a great teacher, and he's one of the brightest guys I've ever met. And he also has made more deals than anybody and more offers than anybody I've ever met. He probably averages 1 offer a day. And I'm talking about a lifetime average, you know? So if you figure out how many years he has and how many days there have been, that's how many offers he's made. Because he loves making offers. And obviously not all of them close, but he gets people thinking. You know, if you've been to a meeting with Peter where he's making offers, you can see how his offers are very creative, and he really gets people to think. And sometimes they go make a deal without him, but he helps them make that deal. So come listen if you get a chance. Let me say a couple things. Number one, we won't have room for people to walk in, so there'll be no walk-ins allowed. If you want to register for the class, you need to get on my website, which is johnschaub.com, and register. And we're going to be wearing masks in the room. We'll be socially distancing in the room. We just want to be safe. You know, Peter and I are both been around the track a few times. We don't want to catch it. My daughter has moved here from Australia with her 3 kids and her husband, and they live with me. So I can't go home to my grandchildren and give them anything. So we're going to be safe, but we're excited about teaching in person. This is the first class that I've taught since January. We had our January seminar, and then our group in Snowmass in first week of February, but that's been the last time. So it'll be exciting to get with people. So I hope you can get there. So let's move on to the next slide here. Adrian, you still with us? Good work. You know, I write for a couple reasons. You know, I told you why I teach, because when you teach something to somebody else, it makes you really think through what you're doing. And every time I teach a seminar, I take a bunch of notes. You know, sometimes I say something that surprises me, but when I'm teaching with Pete, he often says something that is new to me. So I like to teach with other people, but we kind of inspire each other. But there's always new material. There's always new ideas. My book, Building One House at a Time, is designed to give people enough education where they can go out and get started and buy that first house. So it's a book that talks about which house to buy, how to finance it, and the basics of managing that house. Just enough to keep you out of trouble. You know, if you think about it, you probably know people that own a bunch of real estate and have made a lot of money, who have never read a book and they've never taken a class. They just go out and do stuff. And they probably did some things right, and they probably have done some things wrong. Well, if you can eliminate the wrong moves, and that's why I wrote this book, because I made a lot of mistakes when I first started. And most of those mistakes related to buying the wrong properties. You know, I bought properties that didn't go up in value. I bought properties that attracted tenants who were very high maintenance. I bought properties with bad financing. And so I wrote this book to help people avoid those type of problems, because you don't have to buy a lot of property. As Liz pointed out, you don't have to buy a lot of property to make a significant amount of money. And in my book, I talk about buying just one house a year. You know, if you're 40 years old and you buy one house a year for the next 20 years, you'll have 20 houses. And, you know, then at that point, you'll have plenty of equity, and you can sell off some of your houses and pay off the rest of them. And the goal that most people set is having enough free and clear houses so they have the income to live off of. Now, for some people, that's just a couple houses. For some people, it takes 5 or 10 houses. It depends on where you live, of course. It depends on the price range house you buy. I like to tell the story about my dad, who called me. He was in his 60s, and he had worked for the same company his entire life. And he had a pension plan, you know, because he'd been to the same company. But his retirement benefit wasn't very much. It was more than Social Security, but just barely. So it'd be like getting 2 Social Security checks. And, you know, that's not poverty, but that's certainly not wealthy. And he wanted to have more income when he retired than that, so he and Mom could do some fun things. So when in his early 60s, I helped him buy some houses. And by the time he got to be 70, when he retired, we were able to pay off 3 of those houses. And he owned those 3 houses for the rest of his life, he and Mom's life. Well, 3 houses isn't a lot, but you know, if you're 70 years old and you own 3 free and clear rental properties, and he owned a house he lived in too, but the 3 rental properties produced income, more income than any of his retirement benefits from Social Security and his pension plan. So it doesn't take a whole lot of properties to make a big difference in some people's lives. So, you know, you may have enough, but if you know somebody else who needs a couple houses, or if you have somebody who might want to invest with you, it's important that they understand what you're doing. And so that's the reason I wrote that book is you can hand it to somebody else, you can hand it to your kids, you can hand it to your spouse, you can give it to somebody who doesn't know much about the real estate business, and they will learn a lot in this book. And that'll help them understand why you invest and how you invest and why you do the things you do. Okay, enough said. Let's go to the next page, please, Adrian. I think we've probably covered all this because Liz said I do own my own properties. I manage my own properties. So let's go to the next page. Acquiring property strategically and profitably in any market. You know, you all and I are lucky to live in markets which are fairly normal. A lot of my students live in California. A lot of them live in the Boston area or New York City area. And when you live in an area, for example, I was on a call with some friends in Orange County, California yesterday, I think, maybe the day before yesterday, recently. And their median house in their town has gone from 444,000 to just about 800,000 in the last 5 or 6 years. That's pretty good increase. Now the problem is they are all stymied because they're afraid to buy that house for any place close to $800,000, they're afraid it might come down. They don't believe it's going to go up. And I tell them the story about the first time I taught in Orange County, California. And one of my first classes was in San Diego. This about the second class was in Orange County. And the houses that we were looking at then, because when I teach, I get the students to get out of the classroom, get into neighborhoods, learn prices and rents in those neighborhoods, to talk to the neighbors, and to learn as much as they can about those neighborhoods, and then be asking people as you walk through them, do you know anybody who needs to sell a house? Do you know anybody who needs to sell a house? Peter says it, do you know anybody who has an extra house? Same thing. You're looking for somebody who has vacant houses or a reason to sell. And in this last class I taught, January of this year, the class went out, and one group came back and they knocked on this lady's door, and she answered the door, and they said, do you know anybody who needs to sell a house? And she said, how did you know? And the class said, we know what? She said, my father passed away in this house and we really need to sell it. Interesting, isn't it? No sign in the front yard. It wasn't listed. They would have never found that house unless they had talked to this lady. And she was just in town for a short period of time. They found another house in that same neighborhood. And this is a neighborhood where I own a number of houses. So this is a really good rental neighborhood. They'd been sitting empty for 11 years. Isn't that amazing? Somebody let a house sit empty for 11 years. So you find all sorts of stuff if you get out there in the real world and you start talking to people. So we encourage people to do that. But those houses in California, when we were out there teaching in the mid 70s, were selling for $30,000 or $40,000. Those houses are selling for $800,000 today. Now, will they go back down to 40? I don't think so. They're going to have some ups and downs, but the rents have gone up with the prices. And if you look at the prices in your town, and I'm not going to be an authority on Lakeland houses. And of course, when you say Lakeland, there's a lot of neighborhoods. So there's houses in every different price range there. But in my town, the houses I was buying for $40,000 and $50,000 and $60,000 are now all worth over $300,000. Some of them worth over $600,000. So house prices do go up. Some go up more than others. So we'll talk about neighborhoods here in just a second. So let's go to the next slide, please, sir. Before you start looking for a house, you want to think about why you're buying that particular house. Okay? If you just go to a realtor and say, we're looking for a good deal, what will they show you? Huh? They'll probably show you their listings, won't they? And they don't know what a good deal to you is. So a good deal to them is you buying something they have listed. So that's the good deal they're looking for. The benefits that you want may be growth. You know, maybe you have the income you need today, but you want your net worth to go from $20,000 to $1 million over the next 10 years. It may be more income. You know, if you don't have the income you need today, you may want to try to increase your income by a couple $1,000s a month. You may be in a situation where you want to help somebody else, you know, your kids or your parents or some other relative or your employees. And we've helped all those folks. I mean, everybody who's related to me in any way, if you work for me or even if you provide services for me, I always try to help you. I help all sorts of people get into houses. And when I do it, many times I don't make a profit just because I just help them do it. But, you know, when you do that type of thing, when you help somebody else buy a house at a good price on good terms, it comes back. You'll benefit from that eventually. You certainly benefit from it just by watching them enjoy that house. And so we've done that. But the benefits that you want will change, right? When you first start in this business, you may have a goal to produce so much income a month or a year. Back when I first started, my goal was to produce $25,000 a year in income. And this is back in the early 70s. So that's the equivalent of probably $200,000 today. And in order to do that, I had, you know, there are a couple of different ways you could do that, of course. I didn't have a lot of capital. You know, I had a couple $1,000s. So it's not like I could go out and buy a house for cash. If I bought a house and turned around and sold it and paid the taxes and reinvested it and, you know, and went through that routine, I could make some money, but that's a lot of work. So what I learned to do was to put together deals with other folks' money, with investors' money, so they would get the benefit they needed. And typically the benefit they wanted was long-term profit. You know, if somebody is really an investor, what do they have? The answer is they have money, right? And today they may have money sitting in a bank account that's not earning them much, or they may have money in the stock market and they're nervous about the stock market going down instead of up here for the next 5 years. So when you find somebody who has money, and I always like to find somebody who has invested in real estate before and who has made money investing in real estate, because they're much more likely to want to do it again than somebody who has just inherited some money, or somebody just won the lottery, or somebody who made their money in the stock market. Those folks are going to be much harder to deal with. So you put together deals where the investor can put up the money, you can do the work, and there's a lot of work to do, isn't there? Adrian was talking about finding deals and how that takes much more time than managing property, and he's absolutely right. To find a good deal, to go out and find something you can buy below the market, and for it to be a good deal for me, I have to find something I can buy with owner financing, because I'm not going to go to the bank and borrow money to buy property. Now, I'll tell you a little side story. If you're my investor and you have really good credit and you have good banking relationships, and we find a deal that's not in a hurry that we can buy below the market, I'll send you to the bank. That doesn't bother me at all. A lot of people don't mind going to banks because they have good credit. They have money in the banks like them. The banks like to make loans. So if you send somebody else to the bank and they'll make a loan, and sometimes we put together a deal where that's all the money it would take. That bank loan would pay for the whole deal. But if there's some cash involved, and typically, if the benefit I want, if I'm getting started and the benefit I want is cash flow, then we're going to have to buy a property with a low enough loan so it'll have some cash flow. Doesn't that make sense? The biggest check you write each month, if you go out and buy a house with a low down payment, is going to be the check to the lender. That's your biggest expense. So you collect $1,500 a month in rent, your mortgage payment, your loan payment may be $1,200 a month or $1,000 a month. Your taxes won't be that much, your insurance won't be that much, your maintenance won't be that much, but your loan payment will be that much. So in order to have more cash flow in that house, you can't really adjust the tax payment or the mortgage payment or the maintenance payment. Those things are kind of out of your control. You might negotiate a little bit, but you really can't make the insurance go away or the taxes go away or the maintenance go away. Now, I will tell you, I do self-insure a lot of my own properties, but that's a whole different story. But the benefit you want is cash flow. Then you have to have low enough payments so that the house will rent for enough, and after your expenses, there'll be some cash flow left over. And if the investor doesn't need the cash flow, you can make them a deal that you'll take the cash flow today, and they can have more of the profit tomorrow. And so the extreme situation would be you take all the cash flow today and they get all the profit tomorrow. I don't like that. I would much rather have part of the cash flow today and part of the profit tomorrow, because I'm sure that the properties I'm buying are going to be worth more tomorrow. They're going to be worth more, much more in 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years. And I want part of that profit. The reason I got into the business of buying property rather than just listing it and selling it, because I had a license, was that I saw the people that bought property and then turned around and resold it 5 or 10 years later made a whole bunch more money than I did if I sold them the property and then sold it for them again. I might make $10,000 or $20,000 in commission, and they make $200,000 or $300,000 profit. So I want to be on the profit side. Let's talk about price range for a second. The price range of the property you buy has a lot to do with how much money you'll make. And that may sound obvious, but here's the part maybe you're not seeing. If I go out and buy houses, I can still buy a house in my town for $100,000. Now, it's not going to be in a very good neighborhood. It's not going to be much of a house. And the funny thing is, there'll be a lot of competition for that house because there's not many $100,000 houses. So if somebody puts a house on the market for $100,000, it may only be worth 90 or something. You put it on the market for 100, what do you think it'll sell for? Well, my town, it might sell for even more than 100, but if we had a good recession going, I say a good recession that caused people to sell at wholesale prices, what would a wholesale price for $100,000 be? $100,000 house? Well, it may be $50,000 or $60,000 or $70,000. Those are good prices for a $100,000 house. So how far below the market can you buy a $100,000 house? Well, if you're really good and the timing is really good, maybe you can buy it $40,000 or $50,000 below the market. Everybody with me? Now let's ramp up a little bit. If we move up to a $200,000 house, it's a different house, it's a different neighborhood, probably in my town and maybe in your town, it's still a very desirable house. So still a lot of competition. So we move up a little bit higher. We go to a $300,000 house. At some point, if we keep notching up, you don't have to take a giant leap. You don't have to go from a $200,000 house to a $500,000 house. You might be able to go from a $200,000 house to $250,000 house and lose a lot of your competition. And that's the line I'm looking for in any town. I want to cross that line where there's less competition on the side of the line where I'm going to buy property. And the reason for that is now when I find, let's say, a $300,000 house and the people will make me a good deal, how far below the market can I buy a $300,000 house if it's a really good deal? And the answer is more than $50,000. During this last recession, we had one property that we almost bought. We bid on it several times. I wouldn't come off of my price, but it was $1.6 million house. People had $1.6 million first mortgage on it. They offered it to me for $975,000. So just thinking about those two numbers, $1.6 million down to $975,000, that's a $625,000 loss on their mortgage. I looked at that house and it was a good house and it was in a good neighborhood. Nothing wrong with it. It was brand new, really nice house. And I said, okay, how am I going to make money if I buy this house? I can't rent this house. It's way too nice, way too fragile. If I had to repaint this house, it would probably cost $20,000 or $30,000. So it's not a house you'd want to buy to rent. You had to turn around and sell it to somebody else. So if you buy it and sell it to somebody else in a recession, what kind of price are you going to get? And the answer is not a very high one. And then you start asking this question. You say, if I hold on to that house for a whole year and don't sell it, what does it cost me? And it costs you a lot, doesn't it? Because it's a house, you have to keep the air conditioning on, you have to keep the water on, you have to mow the grass, you have to take care of this house or it'll go down in value. So I came up with a number of $650,000. I said, I don't really like it at $650,000, but I will offer them $650,000 and see what happens. And I offered them $650 and they countered at $8. I offered them $650 and they countered at $750. And I offered them $650 and they said no. And somebody else bought it for $750. Well, they made a tremendous buy. I mean, that was a real bargain on that house, but they moved into it. Now, if I wanted to live in that house and moved into it, it would have made sense. But I don't want to live in that house. I have another nice house that I live in. So I didn't need a house to live in. And at that point, I didn't have my kids in town. If my daughter had been here with her kids, I'd have bought the house and let her live in it. That would have worked out pretty well. But the point I'm making is we're in a money business and we're in a risk management business. And we look at our risk and we look at our cost for any investment. So the cost of putting $650 in one house would be significant. Probably cost me $100,000 a year to have that $650,000 invested in that one house. What else could I do with the same $650? And what I did is I went out and bought several other properties below the market that had good cash flow, that were easier to sell, that made good long-term investments. So I made even more money not buying that house than I would have if I had bought that house. Because if I'd have bought it for $650, how much could I sell it for? Well, obviously I could have sold it for $750 and maybe I could have sold it for $850, but what if it took me a year to sell it for $850? Or what if I didn't get $850? Or what if it took longer than a year? And you can see how there's a lot of risk involved in that kind of situation. So the price range is important. And I'm not encouraging you to go out and look at really expensive houses, but I am encouraging you to ramp up a little bit. You know, if you've been buying $100,000 houses, think about 150. If you've been buying 150 houses, think about 200. Because in the long run, you have to ask yourself, what do I want to own? What do I want to own in the long run? Do I want to own? And my friend Jack Miller and I talked together for years, and his typical house is about 50,000, and my typical house is about 100,000 when we were working together. So Jack would have to go out and buy 100 houses to equal my 50 houses. So would you rather have 100 $50,000 houses, or 50 $100,000 houses, or 25 $200,000 houses, or 12 $400,000 houses? It's all the same amount of money, isn't it? All the same amount of money. The income's going to change, but here's the natural progression, I think, and this is what we've done. You start off by buying a lot of houses that have cash flow, lower income houses, lower income duplexes, apartments. You buy stuff for cash flow to start with, kind of get your feet wet. And then you find that you're working hard. I woke up one day and went to the office and I found out I had a little stack of stuff on my desk and none of it was offers. You know, none of it was making me big money. It was all problems that I had to solve, all related to tenants. You know, either tenants not paying the rent, or tenants having maintenance issues, or tenants bothering the neighbors, something. If you have a lot of tenants, you're going to have more problems. So I decided that day to reduce the number of tenants, but not to reduce my income, and not to reduce the amount of real estate I owned, but just reduce the number of tenants I had. So I've been preaching kind of ever since then that I want to make as much money as I can with as few moving parts as possible. As few moving parts as possible. You know, if I could get down to, and I will get down, I mean, I'm down to about a third as many tenants as I used to have. And if I can cut that in half one more time, it makes my life, I don't know if I'll get quite to Adrian's level, or I'm only working 30 minutes a week. You know, I like to work a whole hour a week. I kind of feel noble by putting that hour in, but 30 minutes, it's a good goal. But the fewer tenants you have, now you want some, don't you? You want to just have one, because then you get Sears and they go out of business. You want some tenants, but as my dad had 3, and the good news is he had me, so I did all the work. But if you can find somebody that'll do the work, that's a good thing too. So think about the price range. You can buy any price range house you want. The people in California tickle me sometimes because they live in the hottest market in the country, not the world, but in the country. And they go other places to buy property. I was out there not long ago, a year or so ago, and a lady walked up to me and she said, "I just bought a house in Cleveland." And I didn't respond right away, but I've been to Cleveland. I don't know if you've been to Cleveland, but I've been there and worked there. And I've worked with Habitat for 20 some years, and part of it was in Cleveland. And I said, "Have you seen the house?" She said, "No, I haven't seen the house." I said, "Have you been to Cleveland?" She said, "No, I haven't been to Cleveland." I said, "Why in the world would you buy a house in Cleveland that you haven't seen? You've never been there. And here you are living in California where they go up." She said, "Well, because it rents for, the ratio is better. You know, it's a house that we bought for 50 and it rents for $600 a month." And I said, "Well, that 600 is gross, isn't it? That's not net." She said, "Yeah, that's gross." I said, "How old's the house?" She said, "Well, I don't really know." Let me ask you a question. You buy a 100-year-old house in Cleveland that rents for $600 a month, you think you'll have any maintenance? It's not the gross, is it? It's the net. And so let's talk about areas. So the next thing on the list, buying an area that you know well. I mean, if you're from Cleveland and you like a neighborhood in Cleveland, I'm not throwing shade on Cleveland. I'm just saying that if you can buy something closer to where you live, the chances of you making money are a lot better. And I mentioned earlier, I owned property in 10 states at one time, and that was not a profitable adventure. That was just, I just have a lot of good stories because I own property in 10 states. But today, all my properties are right here in Sarasota. They're all within 10 minutes of my office. So I can drive 10 minutes to be at any one of my houses. And that's important to me. If you have to drive an hour to get to a house, you're just less likely to hop in your car and drive over there. If somebody says, like somebody called me up here this week, said a tree fell down and took the fence down, it's my neighbor's yard, what should I do? Well, I get in the car, I drive over and look at it to see, in fact, if it's my problem or if it's the neighbor's problem. And if it's an hour away, I may not do that. I may just call somebody. So the area is important to me for a couple of reasons. Lifestyle is one of them. And I want them close to where I live, so I don't have to do a lot of driving. In the big cities, people routinely drive half hour. There's probably people in Lakeland that commute to Tampa and commute to Orlando to work. So you can spend a lot of time on the road. But my advice to you is try to buy as close to you as you can, and buy in a price range that makes some kind of sense to you today. And think about doing it with as few moving parts as possible. Let's go to the next slide, please. Thanks, Adrian. The neighborhood is the most important thing to me. And when I send students out in a class, and I don't have this class scheduled at this time, I generally teach a class in Sarasota once a year, and I teach it in January. And I don't have it scheduled this January yet because I really want to get in a position where we can sit next to each other and go out in groups and knock on doors and talk to folks. It makes it so much more fun. The class in Tampa will be good. It'll be fun, but it's a different kind of class. It's not the class I teach on buying, financing, and managing. The class in Tampa is a more advanced class. Peter and I will be, it's sort of a graduate level class in the real estate business. So come, but if you're brand new at this, don't come. if you're brand new at this, read my book first, go out and try some of the things, get some experience, and then come to my first class, or come to Peter teaches a class on acquisition, come to some of the earlier, easier classes, and really build your skill level up first, and then get ready. But the neighborhood is the most important thing to me. I own a number of houses in almost every neighborhood. I rarely own just one house in the neighborhood, because I'll buy one house and I'll like it, everything will work. So I'll go out and find another one. I'll go out and find another one and another one. And I own a number of different neighborhoods. So I own like 7 or 8 neighborhoods. So it gives you some diversity. Some of those neighborhoods go up more than others, but every one of those neighborhoods is safe. Every house I live in is a safe house. I would move my family into every house that I own. And that's how I decide whether or not to buy a house. I go out there in the daytime, but I'll also go out there at night, get out of my car, walk around, and see if I feel safe. If it's an unsafe neighborhood, I don't want to buy that house, because I want to rent to people who are looking for safety. That's a primary human need, is safety. And if they feel unsafe for some reason in the neighborhood, it's going to be harder to rent to them. Now, I know everybody lives somewhere, and everybody has a different concept of what safety is. If you've got 2 pit bulls and a bumper sticker on your window that says, I saw one yesterday, it said, due to the shortage of ammunition, we no longer fire a warning shot. If you live in that neighborhood, it could be more exciting. It may be very safe. It may be very safe for you, but it may scare off your prospective tenants. I want a neighborhood where people take care of their yards, where people take care of their houses. I want to own a house in that neighborhood that nobody knows is a rental. I don't want somebody to be able to see my house and say, that is a rental house. If I don't maintain the house, or if I rent to the wrong folks and they don't take care of it, they'll know it's a rental house. And I put myself on the line here. What I do when I buy a house is I go across the street from the house and I knock on the door. I introduce myself and I say, hi, I'm John Schaub, and I just bought the house across the street from you. And they say, well, that's nice. That's nice. When are you going to move in? Do you have any kids? Do you have a dog? What do you do? We start conversing. And I say, well, we're not going to move into the house. We're going to rent it. How do you think that makes people feel? And the answer is not very good, right? But then I go one step further and I say to them, here's my name. Here's my phone number. If I rent that house to somebody that causes you any kind of trouble, or if you see them doing anything that you think is inappropriate, you call me and I'll fix it. How do you think they feel now? Well, they feel a whole bunch better now. And I better do my job, or what's going to happen? You're right. My phone's going to ring a lot. So I don't want to be renting to the wrong person, or I don't want to fail to maintain that house and cut the branches off the trees and do all the stuff you have to do to be a good neighbor, or my phone will ring and they'll start chewing on me and inspire me to be a better landlord. So that's a good technique. Last thing here, we're talking about a seller. Which seller do you target? And I tell you, go to the next slide. I think we have some clues as to which seller makes a good seller here. Oh, no, let's go to the next slide, and I'll come back to that in a second. Here's some sellers I look for. People that have high equity properties, people that live there for a long time. Now, those two things often go together, don't they? Somebody's lived in a house for 20 or 30 years, good chance is they paid off their loan. They don't even have a loan. They own a free and clear house. If somebody's lived in a house 20 or 30 years, how much profit do they have? Depends on where the house is, but if it's in a neighborhood that's appreciating, they probably have a significant profit. I like to buy houses from people who have a profit. I like to buy houses from people who have a lot of equity, because when I buy houses from those folks, when I identify those particular people who own a house in a neighborhood that I want to buy in, and it's a house that I like, then the chances of negotiating some owner financing with these people is really, really high. And I've bought, as I said a couple of times already, all the houses I bought with owner financing, with the exception of ones I bought with investors who put some cash into it. So if I find a house that needs cash, if I don't have it, I'll bring an investor in. But my first offer many times is a relatively low down payment, with the sellers carrying back the note and carrying payments for a long time. When I first started buying back in the 70s, I found that people were really quick to say yes if I said, I'll make you a small down payment, but I'll take the house off your hands, because I was buying houses that people didn't want. And you have to understand that's kind of the key here. You have to buy a house that somebody wants to get rid of. If the people are really proud of their house and they don't really want to sell it, those are you're not going to buy that house and make a pretty good deal for yourself. But if you find somebody who has an extra house, a house that's been sitting empty, or a house they've inherited, or a house that they moved out of because they bought a new house, those folks are much more motivated to make you to accept an offer that involves them carrying back a note. So you make your offer, and make an offer that you like, and you make an offer based on the income you know that property will produce. So you have to know what the rents are going to be. You need to know what your taxes, insurance, and maintenance are going to be. And as a rule of thumb, mine run about 40% of my gross. So a house rents for $1,000 a month. I net about $600 a month after I pay in taxes, insurance, and maintenance. You need to know numbers in your town. You need to know numbers in your neighborhoods. You need to know that a brand new house is going to have lower maintenance than an old house. So I bought, 23, 24 brand new houses. And the reason I buy those brand new houses is twofold. I get brand new roofs. So I have a 20-year roof sitting on that house. I don't have to put a roof on it for 20 years. And it's a pretty good portion of my maintenance, isn't it? If you break down what it costs to put a roof on, let's just say it costs $12,000 and it's going to last 24 years, be $500 a year just for the roof. So, if you can get a new roof, you get a new air conditioner, you get new windows, it's worth looking at newer properties to do that. Now, the other side of the story is the last couple houses I bought were older houses in really good neighborhoods, and they had been totally remodeled. They had new roofs, they had new windows, they had new air conditioners, they had new kitchens and bathrooms, they had new flooring. They weren't quite like new houses because they were still the old style house, but they were in really nice shape, and they rent fast just because people like them. They walk in, they can see this house has been taken care of, and it's in really nice shape, so they rent well. So long-term ownership, high equity properties, that's something that most people don't target. They're just looking for a good deal, right? They're looking for a house. Sometimes you're looking for a house that needs work. Let me tell you just quickly why I don't buy houses that need a lot of work. If I buy a house with a low down payment, let's say I can buy a $200,000 house with $10,000 down, that's a really low down payment. A 5% down payment would be $10,000. So if you can buy with $10,000 down on $200,000, that's really low. And let me point out that we're a rare country in the world that has long-term fixed rate financing on houses. Most places, my daughter lives in Australia, most places in Australia, Canada, most places in Europe, all over, when you get into the third world countries, there's no financing at all. But the first world countries that have financing typically have short-term financing, 5-year financing, 3-year financing, and there's a variable interest rate, and you have to repay it every 3 or 5 years or refinance. To get a 30-year fixed rate loan is just a remarkable thing. And some of you probably remember that Warren Buffett said a few years back, he said, if I was starting over again, I'd go out and buy 100,000 single-family houses with 30-year fixed rate loans. Because he just understands the power of that fixed rate and the power of the compounding value over time and the power of the compounding rents over time. Rents go up at compound rates too. So if I have a simple interest fixed rate loan at 5% and my rents go up 5% a year, I've got a real money-making machine there. So what we have is really good for us. That's why Liz stays so excited, because what we have is exciting. It's good stuff. Existing unhappy lenders. There's probably not a lot of unhappy lenders right now, right? You see their smiling faces. But when we have recessions, when we have a downturn, and Disney just announced they're laying off, 25,000 people, is that right? The airlines are laying off a whole bunch of people. The hotels are basically, a lot of them are just closed down or operating at 10% occupancy. There's going to be a lot of folks that are out of work and are going to stay out of work for a while. Well, when that happens, at some point that filters down to the lenders, and there may be some moratorium right now, but at some point, the people who are not making their payments are going to lose those houses. And the lender doesn't want to foreclose on houses, of course, if they're going down in value. That doesn't make any sense at all. I'm a lender, I'm a hard money lender, and I don't fund rehabbers today, but I used to. And right before the last recession, I had quite a bit of money out to people who were buying houses and very successfully buying them, fixing them up and selling them and making a profit. But then the music stopped, and they got caught with houses. And many times they got caught with houses that weren't totally rehabbed because they ran out of money. Because they couldn't sell, they were planning on selling house B and taking that money to rehab house C, and they couldn't sell house B. So as a lender, I got a lot of houses back, and unfortunately, the ones I got back needed a lot of work. They needed kitchens, they needed bathrooms, they needed roofs, they needed a lot of work, and they weren't going up in value; they're going down in value. So I had some firsthand experience of being an unhappy lender. When you find somebody like me, you can make a real good deal. Do you think I was willing to sell those houses cheap just to get rid of them? And the answer is, you betcha. I didn't want to fix those houses up because I knew even if I spent 10 or 20,000 or 50,000 fixing them up, they weren't going to be worth a lot more money. That was money just going down the drain. That was throwing good money after bad. So I wholesaled those houses. I held on to a few of them. The best ones I held on to until the market corrected, and I was able to sell them and get my money back. But most of them we just wholesale and got rid of. So when you find an unhappy lender, that doesn't mean they're stupid. They just got caught. The world changed. They got caught. And if it's an institutional lender, there's different techniques in dealing with institutional lenders than with private lenders, but I like to deal with private lenders. There's a lot of people in my town that make private loans, and you should make your business to get to know the people in your town that make private loans. There's probably some in your group, and they're happy today, and everybody's happy today, but when prices go down and it's hard to sell and it's hard to rent, the lenders typically don't want to be landlords. They don't want to own those properties. They don't want to manage them. So if you can find those folks and it's a house you want to buy in the right neighborhood and you can rent it. And the interesting thing is about this market and about the last big downturn we had, 12 years ago, was that we only, in the big downturn, we only lost about 10% of our tenants. And we had a lot of tenants, and about 10% of them were in the construction business, and they just totally lost all their income and they left town. I concluded that's why people in the construction business drive pickup trucks. So when things get slow, they can put all their stuff in the back of the truck and they can drive someplace where they can get a job. Makes sense, right? That's a little humor. So I'm looking for unhappy lenders. The next line says unhappy partnerships. Kind of the same thing. When the market's hot, and the market's kind of hot now, and people are excited about real estate. Everybody wants to buy real estate. So some people are partnering up because there'll be some hotshot who said, I'll do the work. And that's me, I'll do the work. I'll find a house. I'll get it under contract or below market. I'll contract with good terms. I'll manage it till we sell it. All that makes sense. And it makes a lot of sense when the market's going up. When the market goes down, sometimes the people that have their money tied up in those deals want out. They want their money back. And it's really hard to get your money back when things are going down. Really hard to get your money back when banks aren't lending and when you can't sell the properties. So you find people stuck in these partnerships that want out, and you can make terrific deals with them. And then high land to improvement ratios. The last couple of houses I bought for less than the land value. Think about that for a second. If you buy a house and a lot and you buy it for less than the land value, you kind of got the house for free, didn't you? Now, these are good houses. These are houses, one of them rents for $1,800 a month, one rents for $2,000 a month. So they're decent houses and they're decent neighborhoods, but they were for sale. One had been for sale for more than a year. The other one, the people had fixed this house up and then they decided to buy a bigger house. So they bought a bigger house. Now they had two payments. They were going to get rid of this one. So there were reasons people sold them, but I was able to buy them for the lot values. I looked for neighborhoods in my town that are improving because people are tearing down houses that were built back in the 30s and 40s and building new houses, or they're buying the older houses and they're totally rehabbing them. In many cases, they add to them. They'll add a room or add a suite or they'll add a second story sometimes. They'll add to them. When they do that, they improve that neighborhood. People were somewhat critical of the hedge fund buyers coming in and buying houses during this last downturn. I say, come on down, boys. Come on down and buy all you can. Because somebody that has pretty much unlimited funds, like a hedge fund, comes in and buys a house, they fix it up. They put a new kitchen in it, or at least they paint it and put a new roof on it and put an air conditioner in it and fix things that are broken. What happens to property values when they take a house that's really been run down and sitting empty for a while and they fix it up? Well, it improves the value of that house, but it also improves the value of everything around there. So if you can find a neighborhood that has houses that need to be rehabbed, you know, they're just ripe with houses that should be fixed up because it's a good neighborhood, it's good land, and you can buy it for the land value, you've done something very smart. Let's move to the next page, please, Adrian. No, let me just make one point here because we skipped over the line that says make offers. The thing that separates people who are really successful from the people who don't have much success in this business is that line, the ability to make an offer. I've had people call me and say, John, we've gone out and looked at 100 houses and we haven't bought one. And I would say, well, how many offers have you made? And they said, well, we haven't found one to make an offer on yet. I said, if you looked at 100 houses, you should have made a whole bunch of offers. You know, you don't know the situation of the seller until you make that offer. You really don't know what they're thinking. A lot of the houses I buy are overpriced. You know, people are asking, like the last house second to last house I bought, the people were about probably $50,000 over the market, and they'd had it on the market for over a year. Well, you combine those two things, and it was listed with a realtor. You combine those two things, you find an opportunity because the realtor wants to get rid of that house, and they know they're having a hard time selling something that's overpriced. That at some point, the sellers decide it's time to get rid of this thing. Price is not important. Getting rid of it's more important than price. And if you're in the right place at the right time, you make that deal. So you make offers that are good for you. Don't worry too much about what the other party wants. Don't believe a second what the broker tells you. You find a house and then you use your common sense to say, if I was in that seller's situation, if I owned this house for the last year and it was sitting empty, and I've been making payments and mowing the grass, and now it needs a new roof, or now it needs some maintenance, or you find out these people have left town. You know, they're now in a different town, so they've left it behind. Most people don't want to rent a house, do they? Most people just want to sell. So because they don't have that rental option, and I do, if I buy that house, I'm going to rent it. I can make an offer that solves a problem for them. It takes this house off their hands. Maybe doesn't give them a whole bunch of money now. Maybe doesn't give them any payments for a while, but it relieves them of this particular problem. And by making those offers, if you make enough of them, you'll make some really good buys. You'll buy good properties at good prices on good terms. Okay, now let's skip the next page. We've already covered it and go to the page after that. One more. There we go. Structuring deals to distribute cash flow. Up at the top here, when Jack Miller and I used to teach, we would say that real estate was the ideal investment. It had income, has depreciation, has equity buildup, has appreciation. You can use leverage to buy it. Ideal investment. And a lot of people have picked up on that, and that was back in the 70s. So I'm not saying we said it first, but we're the first ones to say it that I know about. We were the first one teaching seminars on houses. Nobody was teaching a seminar on how to buy single-family houses back in the 70s. And we just figured it out early. We were both CCIM candidates, and if your realtors on the line here know what a CCIM is, and we both had taken all the classes, and that's how we got to know each other. We met each other in those classes, and we discovered that we had each been buying houses, and we both liked houses, and there were reasons we both bought houses. But realtors back then didn't see houses as investments. And interestingly enough, back in the 70s, the Association of Realtors frowned on realtors buying investment properties. They didn't think you should buy. You think if it was a good deal, you should sell it to somebody. So they've come full circle on that. But interestingly enough, I know realtors, you know realtors. I know some realtors who do own a lot of property. They're very, very bright people. They take your commissions, they invest it in property, and they do very well. I know other realtors have been in the business for 20 or 30 years, and they still don't even own the house they live in. They still rent. I've rented to a number of realtors. I bought and sold houses from realtors. I had one guy who would call me up every time we had a recession. This is a realtor who had like 50 salesmen and 5 offices, you know. He'd get in trouble because the cash flow, if you're a broker with a bunch of offices and we have a recession, your cash flow goes from positive to big time negative in a hurry. And he just needed cash to survive. So he would sell me his house. I'd write him a check. We could sell it, buy it in a day or two. And then he'd buy the house back for me when things corrected, 5 years down the road or whenever he got back on his feet again. I'd write him the house. He made it a good tenant, then he could buy it back from me if he wanted to. So when you own a house, you want to think about what part of this block you want, the appreciation, the cash flow. the debt pay down or the tax benefits. And you have to be smart enough to partner up, if you're going to have partners, with somebody who needs the parts that you don't want, right? So if you need the cash flow, you don't want to partner up with somebody else who needs cash flow. You need to find somebody who's not looking for cash flow. They're looking for tax shelter or growth or loan pay down. And some people are really debt adverse. You know, there's a lot of folks that think you should have any debt at all. And I believe that investment debt that can be repaid by your tenants is safe debt. And I think you provide a service for your tenants and for the people you buy from when you buy those houses and rent to somebody who needs a house. So I don't see buying leveraged investment real estate is a dangerous thing or anything that's financially unhealthy. I do think that your goal should be to own the house you live in free and clear. I've owned my house free and clear since 1980. One of our early goals was to pay it off, and we live in a nice house in a nice neighborhood. And so another benefit of being in the house business is you probably should be able to live in the house you want to live in. I'm not going to tell you you should live in a big house or a small house. You pick your own house, but you should be able to live in a house that you like, and you should have it free and clear. That's a great goal to have, because then if all else fails, you can go back and you can say, okay, let's sit in my free and clear house for a while and figure out what we're going to do next. So figure out what part of this cash flow quadrant, some people call it, that you want, what's important to you, and make your offer so that you get that. So think through this offer before you make it. Just don't go up. Somebody got a house for sale, don't go offer them $20,000 down and go get a bank loan. Think about how this house is going to benefit you. Let's go to the next slide, please. $1 million relationships, and I've had a bunch of them. Some of them have been just with my handyman. I've got a handyman that's done work for me for probably, I'm going to say, more than 30 years right now. And I've helped him buy a number of houses. He's a millionaire because of the properties he owns. But he's been very, very good to me. And for about 25 years, where he was in my office every day and we managed a whole bunch of properties, I couldn't have done it without him. He can fix a whole bunch of stuff. Likewise, I had a bookkeeper that worked for me for just about 30 some years. And she lived in a company house. She lived in one of my houses, and she was in our pension plan, and we took care of her. And she wasn't a millionaire when she retired, but she had more money than she'd ever spent. So we help people develop large income streams and net worths. That's good for them. And we have relationships, long-term relationships with people who have money. One of the first classes I took, which was probably back in 72 or 73, was with a guy by the name of Charles Ray Considine, Chuck Considine. Now, Chuck was a CPA and he was a tax attorney. And at that time, he owned over $100 million worth of real estate. So he was a fairly successful guy. He also had 12 children. So he was a remarkable person in many ways. But he taught me several things. And one thing he said is always stuck in my mind. He said, John, it doesn't have to be your money to make you a profit. If you can control money, if you just have access to money, and the obvious relationship here is money that you borrow from a bank, but that's not easy money to get. That's probably the hardest money you get is money you borrow from a bank. The easiest money you get, or the easiest debt you get. Somebody was asking me on a Zoom meeting here earlier this week, John, do you think we'll have some inflation? And I said, yeah, I think we will have some inflation. They said, well, are you in debt? And I said, well, you don't have much debt right now, but if I wanted to be $1 million in debt, I could get there, in about a week. And they said, well, how would you do that? Would you go down to the bank and borrow $1 million? And I said, no. You don't go to the bank and borrow $1 million to get $1 million in debt, because that $1 million they want back. You have to pay that $1 million back. What I would do is I go find somebody who has something for sale, and probably more than one thing, maybe a couple things for sale, and they really wanted to get rid of them. And I would buy them with a low down payment and get them to carry the financing. Now think about, if you're new at this is a very important difference. The difference between a bank loan and seller financing is significant. If you go down to the bank and borrow money, first of all, you have to be able to qualify to borrow it and beg them for it. And even then, even though rates are low today, you know, the advertised rates are low, but have you ever gone to the bank and tried to borrow money and the rates that they charge you were a little higher than the ones they had on television? It's sort of like going to the car dealer. You know, sometimes it's not exactly the same car, or it's a little different price when you get there. So there's a little bait and switch going on in the banking business. But if you borrow money from the bank, if I go down and borrow money from the bank and don't pay them back, will they just say, oh well, good try? No. What will they do? Well, if I have other assets, and I do, they would try to take those other assets and sell them and get their money back, right? So if you borrow money from a bank and you have personal liability, it's a whole different deal than borrowing money from a seller when you buy their house, because you're really not borrowing money from them, are you? What you're doing is you're buying their house and they're financing it for you. And you can say to them, if I can't, you know, we'll do our best to make this house work, but if we can't make the payments, we'll give you the house back. And the law actually protects you. The law in Florida and almost every state that I know of protects buyers who buy from sellers who finance them with purchase money mortgages, because if the seller hasn't been damaged, if you just give them their house back and the house is still in good shape, they can't come after your other assets. So that's a major difference. Talking about selecting investments and investors with long-term potential here, and we'll kind of try to wrap this up. I won't invest with somebody unless I know they're willing to stay into the deal until it doubles in value. That's my rule of thumb. We never sell a house until it doubles in value. So if I buy a house for $300 a day, I'm going to hold it till it's worth $600,000. How long will that take? I don't know. Could take 5 years, could take 10 years, could take 15 years. Depends on what the economy does. But I'm in it for the long term, and I want a long-term investor too. Sharing profits rather than taking commissions. When I had a broker's license, I had the right to take a commission, but the commission was never as much as a profit. I mentioned that earlier. And plus, if I take a commission today and I pay the taxes on the commission today, I'm unlikely to invest that money. I'm pretty likely to spend that money, right? Somebody writes me a check for $20,000 for a commission. I'm probably going car shopping or something, and then we'll do something foolish with that $20,000 or take a vacation. But if I end up with 5% interest in the deal or 50% interest in the deal, and that grows up to be $250,000 or $500,000 one day, when I get that check for $250,000, I may still go car shopping if I want to, but I have a lot more of a likelihood that I'll reinvest most of that money in something else, and I'll keep it invested. And this is not a seminar on 1031 exchanges, but hopefully you know about 1031 exchanges. And another advantage of the real estate business, significant advantage, is that when we sell an investment property that we've had for 20 or 30 or 40 years, we don't have to pay a dime in taxes if we want to invest in another property. So we can roll all that profit into another property without paying any taxes at all. Limiting your risk and that of any investors, you need to be smart enough, first of all, to buy properties that will make money. That's the major risk you have. And when you think about all the Ponzi schemes and all the people who have lost money in different investment deals, it's typically not because somebody sued them. It wasn't a liability issue. Typically, the investment went bad. They just didn't make any money. So you want to make sure that whatever you buy, if you buy with an investor, is going to make you some money, which means you know your business. You know that it's below the market. Even if we have a bump in the road here, if you buy something today for $250 and it goes down to $200 a year from now because we're in a recession, that you're in a position to hold on to that until it comes back, and then it goes back up again. And I don't have a chart here in this presentation, but you should go Google the median price of a house in your town for the last 40 or 50 years and see what it's done. Get real with this. And I like to look at real houses. I like to take a house, and you really have to know the house pretty well, because I won't tell you who, but I had a friend call me today and said, John, we found this house. The guy bought it for $250 and he sold it for $500 6 months later. That went up a lot. And I said, if the price is higher, I'm not sure it went up. Is there a chance they fixed it up? Is it a chance it was a really old house that needed new plumbing, new roof, new wiring, new everything? And they spent $200,000 putting that house back in shape, and then they made a $50,000 profit on it. Houses don't, you might be able to buy a $500,000 house for $250, but probably not in this market. It's pretty unlikely that you're going to do that in a market that's moving pretty well. But if you're going to invest with somebody else, you want to make sure that you know the business, you can buy it below the market, your finance is good, you can carry the cash flow. And then as far as the risk of a loss because of a lawsuit, you have insurance, and it would be wise to use a land trust. Sometimes people go out and set up corporations or LLCs and before they've even bought a piece of real estate, and I think that's foolish. And if you do have a corporation or an LLC or any entity that gives you that has potential to give you some asset protection, make darn sure that you understand how you get asset protection from that entity and you play by the rules, because an insurance company is going to have a really good lawyer. And if somebody does get sued, they're going to do their best to walk away from that deal and say, no, insurance doesn't cover you because. And so if you haven't dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's and done everything exactly right, your insurance won't be any good. Developing the skills necessary to acquire and manage, we've just been talking about that. So let's go to the next page. Strategies to increase your cash flow when you need it. Okay, nice picture. Flip the page. The cash flow myth. I call it the cash flow myth the idea of buying low income houses because they have more gross cash flow. I said this earlier, but net cash flow is what you're after, not gross cash flow. You can buy things that have, let's not pick on a particular type of property, but you can buy things for pretty darn cheap. You can buy things for back taxes sometimes that maybe just buy something for $10 or $15 or $20,000 that'll rent for $400 or $500 a month because, the folks who rent it, that's the only choice they have. It's the only thing in town they can rent for $400 or $500 a month. That house or that property, whatever it is, it will have good gross cash flow. Okay, may or may not be high maintenance as far as taking care of the property, but you have to look at the net and you have to look at the prospects for what will this property do for me over the next 10 or 20 years. Now it's okay to have good cash flow, and if you can take that cash flow and build it, into equity that will appreciate, that'll be liquid, easy to sell for cash. One thing I learned about apartments is they're not easy to sell for cash. I had a number of different units. I had a 4-unit building for years, and that one is interesting. That one 4-unit building caused me more trouble than 50 houses. One 4-unit building caused me more trouble than 50 houses. Had more trouble with the tenants, had more trouble with the neighbors, had more trouble. So we decided to sell it, and I bought it for like 120, and I think we sold it for 300. And that was probably 15 years later, 10 years later. I forget exactly what the numbers were now. But when I sold it, and it appraised at 300, and it was worth 300, but the buyers didn't have $300,000 cash. The bank wouldn't lend $300,000 cash. In fact, the bank would only lend $200,000 cash. And the people say, well, we don't have $100,000 to put down. And I ended up selling that building to them for $25,000 down and carrying back a note. Well, think about that. Here you think you have this big profit in a property, but when you go to sell it, the people you're selling to don't have enough money to pay you. So whatever you buy, think through who you're going to sell it to, where will they get the money to buy it, and what will it cost them. And this leads me to obviously another reason that we like houses in good areas. Is banks like houses in good areas, a well-built house, well-maintained in a good area. They love that house as collateral. That's their favorite collateral. So when you do go to sell to somebody, if you have a decent house in a decent neighborhood, the banks will probably make them a high loan. The last house we sold, this is a house that we ended up with in the last recession, but we just kept it for a long time. And the last house we sold for $275,000, and the people got a $260,000 loan on it. That's remarkable, isn't it? And it was a 3% loan. Well, if you can find a bank who will make that kind of loan to a buyer, it needs to be the right property, doesn't it? It needs to be the right buyer. It needs to be somebody with a job and credit, but it needs to be the right property too, so they can go out and not be afraid of that property. So think about that when you buy things that have a lot of cash flow. Unless you want to own them the rest of your life, you're going to have to sell them to somebody someday. One of the largest landlords here in town, and I won't tell you his name, he passed away recently, but I know him well. And he tried to sell me all of his stuff, and it was all low-end stuff and apartments and duplexes and small houses. And this guy really had a good heart. He bought those properties so he could rent them to people who really needed a place to live. He was a good landlord. and he's very wealthy. But I looked at him and I said, you know, there is no cash market for any of this property. The only people you could possibly sell any of these properties to are the people who live in there now, or people who are just have the same type of jobs as the people who live there now. They don't have enough credit to get a bank loan, and no banker is going to lend money on these properties. They're old properties in old parts of town, you know, that just were not good collateral. Now, banks are not supposed to redline neighborhoods. They're not supposed to redline properties, but what they do is they set a minimum loan that they'll make. And if their minimum loan is $100,000 and these houses are selling for 55, they're not going to loan 100 against a $55,000 house. So you can see an effect to do it. So the important point to take away from this is when you buy a property, think about who you're going to sell it to eventually. When Peter and I talk, and you'll hear Peter talk next weekend if you come, he'll talk about not just buying things for long term, but not buying things that you can use as currency. So if you do buy a property that has good cash flow, your intention may be not to own it for a long time, but to trade it to somebody else who needs that cash flow and buy what they have. So we'll expound on that type of thinking. The one thing that has the most influence on your cash flow, we talked about this, but I'll restate it for you. The one thing that has the most influence on your cash flow is the amount of your loan payment. It's the debt you have on the property. It's the terms you have on that debt. So it's not the type of property you have. And the cash flow myth is saying the type of property affects your cash flow. It really might, but what really affects your cash flow is the payments on that loan. I can buy $1 million house and have positive cash flow if my payments are low enough, right? Or I can go out and buy 5 duplexes and have negative cash flow if my payments are too high. It's the payments. Focus on the payments. Focus on the net, not the gross. We talked about the lady in Cleveland that was excited about her high gross income, but the net after the expenses on a house, old house, needs a lot of repairs in an area where it snows, you won't be happy with the net number. And trading growth for cash flow. If I have a house that I've owned for a long period of time and it's gone up a lot, and I have enough houses where I really don't need all my houses now, I could sell one of my houses, couldn't I? What will happen to my cash flow if I sell a house and I carry back the note myself? Will it go up or will it go down? If I sell a house, let's just take a house that I just sold for $275. If I sold that house, it rents for $1,800 a month. Okay, 40% of $1,800 a month is or 60% of $1,800 a month, it'd be $6,000, and 48 would be about $10,800 a year. If I sold that $275,000 house for a very low down payment to somebody who had good income, but not the ability to borrow from a bank, what kind of interest rate would they pay me? Do you know anybody today that's paying more than, banks are charging if you have perfect credit and a great job, and a down payment probably, you can, I think, get a 3% 30-year fixed rate loan on an owner-occupied house. Isn't that about right? Really low today. What if your credit's not so good? What if you have a job where your income is not that high, but you know you can come up with the money? Are you willing to pay a higher interest rate to buy a house today? And the answer is sure. There are people that pay a lot more than 3% interest to buy a house. In fact, if you're an investor, you go to the bank, you're going to pay more than 3%, won't you? You might pay 5 or 6%. There are a lot of homeowners, they go down to MSCOT, what interest rate do they pay? There are a lot of homeowners that pay a lot more interest, and they're not used to 3 and 5%. They're used to 10 and 20 and sometimes higher rates of interest. So I have a number of students, and I just wrote a newsletter about them, that sell houses all the time and carry back notes at 10% interest. Well, if I carried back, let's just say I sold that $275,000 house to somebody for nothing down, let them in for nothing down. You think I'd get a lot of calls or I ran an ad that says nothing down? And then I financed the full $275,000 at 10% interest. I'd have $27,500 a year in income compared to, I think I just said about $10,000 a year in income as a rental. So you can see the cash flow when you sell property and finance it, if you do it right, can be dramatically higher. So at some point, you may want to convert some of your growth, some of your assets are going up in value to cash flow. It's simple. Nothing I talk about really is very complicated. I hope that everything you've heard tonight has been, you've been able to understand it and see that it's not, this is not calculus. It's not even algebra. This is fourth grade math. And if you got through the fourth grade and paid attention, you know enough math to be successful in a real estate business. And to make it more complicated than that, I think is a mistake. I said this earlier, but if you can do it with fewer moving parts, if you can do it with fewer tenants, with fewer loans, you're just less likely to make a mistake. And, when I'm in a room and somebody stands up front and they say, well, I bought 100 houses last year, I always raise my hand and I say, why? I mean, don't you ever have any fun? What do you do with your life if you're buying 100 houses a year? That's 2 a week. Now what do? You got to sell them, you got to rent them, you got to do something with them. That's a lot of work. I've bought more than 100 houses, but it's been over 40 years. I've averaged probably about 5 houses a year for 40 years. And that's actually properties. It's not just houses, because I have bought some duplexes, apartments, and condos and different things. But that's still quite a bit of volume when you think about it. That's a lot of deals. And the more deals you do, the more likely you are to get in trouble. I mean, the more likely they are to make a mistake, you get somebody mad at you, to end up in front of a judge. You just, if your focus is on high volume, so you have a good story, so you can stand up in front of the class and say, I do 100 deals a year, I think you're focusing on the wrong thing. Far better to be able to stand up in front of the class and say, look, I only do 4 or 5 deals a year, but I don't have to work very hard. I have a lot of time to spend with my family. I can travel, I can do what I want, because I have a great lifestyle, because I don't have that many deals going on. I was able to do it simpler. So keep it as simple as you can. Let's see what the next slide says. It'll be a surprise for me too. I think we're at the end of the presentation. So just to kind of sum up, and I'll stay around here for about maybe 10 minutes for questions. But Pete and I are, teach this class on Change Happens. We've I wrote a book on buying real estate in a changing market back in 2006, I think, 2006. Right before the last change we had. So it's funny how you kind of get these gut feelings that things are about to change. It's sort of like you feel the weather is about to change. So I have that feeling now. I think that, and I don't hope for it, but I'm ready for it. And that's going to be the message here in our class. Be ready. And here's ways you can be ready to be safer. Start identifying some money you have today and some friends who have money, and make sure you have the right tenants, and just don't go crazy right here at the end of this big run up we've had for the last 10 years. Hold off. There may be more opportunity, but if you buy one house a year, if you buy one house right now, and we're right at the top of the market, and it goes down 30 or 40 or $100,000 in value, but you hold on to it, and you can afford to hold on to it because you have a good tenant and your payments are low enough, or you can hang in there, that's okay. You learn a lot. Every time you buy a house, it's a seminar. So it's a good thing to do. You should always be looking for the right opportunities, and maybe listen to this again if you've recorded it, or if it's able to be recorded. So you can kind of get the big picture, and kind of focus on not making a lot of mistakes, because if I can help you not make a mistake, my job is done. So thank you very much. I've enjoyed being with you tonight, and I'll be around here for some questions, Liz.
Yes, definitely, John. Thank you so much. I mean, I was taking notes, and I've been getting some questions in. So we're ready to ask you some questions if you're ready to go for it.
I'm as ready as I'll ever be.
Okay. One thing that more than one person sent me a quick note on was, you're a super successful guy now. You sound confident. You're all those good things. So it's hard for some of us to see you as the person you were when you first got started. Were you ever nervous, in other words, when you started making offers? Because people are out here and they're new, or they're not new, but they don't make offers often, and they're scared. How did you overcome it? What are some of the first things that you say to people when you're starting to talk to people about their houses, et cetera? Can you just share with us about that? Remind us of what you were like when you started.
You really need to ask my wife, but I'll give it a shot.
Okay.
I can remember, and I really do remember this. I can remember my hand shaking as I was filling out an offer after I'd made an offer, an oral offer to somebody, and they said yes. You know, I about fell off the chair when they said yes, because my offer was for less than I thought it was worth, and it was with a low down payment and with monthly payments that went on for a while. And they said, yeah, we'll do that. And I said, well, now what do I do? You know, I didn't believe anybody's going to say yes. I thought, but and I, you know, you can. I don't know if I have that contract. I should dig out that file. I still own that house. I should dig out that file and see how shaky
Oh, wow.
it was on that contract. You know, but yeah, you know, I was nervous. I didn't know what I was doing. You know, I just because, you know, it's funny because I can remember thinking I was the smartest guy in the world. You know, I had a college degree and I had a real estate broker's license. I said, I'm a genius. Well, I found out pretty quick I was not a genius because I got playing in the wrong game pretty fast. I got buying properties that were owned by people who were smarter than I was. Okay. And one reason I stay in the house business, and it's not to take advantage of people, but it's to play in a game where I have an advantage. You know, I'm not a poker player, but if I was a poker player, I certainly wouldn't go into a game where the minimum bet was $1,000 or something, you know, because it'd be way over my league. And I don't know the game well enough. I'd lose a lot of money. And so the analogy in the real estate business is that if you're going up against Donald Trump, that's probably not a good thought. You know, and the guys, I bought some property from guys early on, and I thought they weren't very smart, and I learned later they were a lot smarter than I was. You know, so by buying houses from sellers, you know, by buying a house to start with instead of something big, you know, instead of buying a commercial building, or, you know, I own restaurants, I own motels, I own some silly stuff. Instead of buying properties like that from people who may be smarter than you are, if you buy a house is fairly easy to figure out what it's worth. You know, you should be able to guess. And I tell students that when they go out in my class and walk up and down these streets, they should be able to come back and give me a range, a fairly tight range on these houses. They should be able to say, you know, they shouldn't say it's worth between 200,000 and 300,000. That's way too big a range. They should be able to say it's worth maybe 200,000 and 225,000. You know, they should be able to tighten that up a little bit. And if you don't know enough about your market to know that much, you know, to know about what a house is worth, you don't need to have them appraised, because an appraisal is just going to be, it's just their guess, and they could be off by 10 or 20,000 bucks too. So you give yourself a range, and if you think it's worth between 200 and 225, then of course you're trying to buy it for either less than 200 or close to 200 with good terms, and that makes the deal safer for you. So that's how you get over this nervousness. You're able, first of all, I have a rule, and I've been sharing this for years. I said, you should be able to explain to your spouse how you're going to make money on this deal. Okay. And if you can't explain it to your spouse and your spouse doesn't believe you, then probably it's not the right deal. And that'll give you either give you the confidence, or it'll hopefully keep you married. But you know, you want to be confident of your offer. And then if you're nervous, and especially when you're dealing with lenders, you know, my rule of thumb with lenders is you take the lowest offer you think they'll take, and then you knock another 20% off of it. Sometimes they say yes. You know, sometimes you buy things at really good prices because you surprise yourself. And so the kind of what I say in the seminar, sometimes I say, you know, if the offer is not embarrassing to you, it's not low enough.
I think that's a very true thing for all of us. I know I was very nervous to make what I thought was a lowball offer to someone. I thought, oh man, they're going to just be so mad at me, or this, you know, whatever. And you know, they weren't at all. In fact, they didn't think it was a lowball offer. So I probably didn't go low enough, I guess.
Well, you know, the way you present it, and you know, if you're a nice person and you're not being mean about it, there are people that walk up somebody and beat on the door and say, look, you're going to lose this house in foreclosure if you don't sell it to me right now. You know, that's not me.
Yeah.
That's not my approach. My approach is, look, if I can help you, I want to. And I've come across people who I can't help. I mean, there's some folks who are in so much trouble, I just can't figure out how to help them. So you have to know that if you're out talking to real people in real neighborhoods, you're going to run across all kinds of people out there. And that's why I think my presentation tonight is kind of important, because to get you to focus on what you want to buy and why you want to buy it, how you want to buy it. And you need to have that in your head before you start talking to people. Yes,
the very basics. Start with the basics and build onto that, right? Yeah. And listen, I just want to say out loud, I'm sorry, what, John?
I say just stick with the basics. You don't ever have to get fancy in this business. I mean, you know, you hear some people talk. Peter Fortunato, of course, has 100 ways to buy a house, and actually, we had one of our students wrote a book called 1,000 Ways to Buy a House with Nothing Down, and that was 1960. So there's a lot of clever things you can do, but you don't have to be clever. You know, you don't have to be real fancy. But what you do have to do is you have to buy a house, and that you know,
Yeah.
even if you buy it wrong, you have to buy a house to get started. And you learn every time you buy something. You learn something, and if you do it well, of course, that builds your confidence. And if you do it wrong, you still say, "Well, I learned this. I won't do that again. I'll do it better next time."
That's right. You need to get out of it and get on down the road. That's what I've always done, whatever it is. I had a question in here. Let's see. We have something over in the chat room for you. One from James that says, just to clarify, in a recession, if you buy in the right area below market value or creatively, you'll be okay? That's his question.
Yeah, you'll be okay if you're willing to hold it until the recession's over. I mean, you can't buy it during as the beginning of the recession and sell it as the recession's still going on. It probably will keep going down. But so you have to have a long-term outlook. And but if you buy the house, the first house I ever bought, I paid too much for. I paid too high an interest rate. I made too big a down payment, paid 20% down payment. And but I still have that house, and I've had that house now for 7 recessions. You know, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. But I'll give you some real numbers. I think I paid 33 for it, and it's worth about 800 today. So you know, they keep going up over a long period of time, and of course that's over 47 years or something. So I mean, it's a long, long time. But if you hold on to things, and so it's important to buy something that you don't mind managing for a while, you know, because the folks that get tired of managing or get mad at your tenants, or the tenants get mad at you and they run you out of business and they make you sell, well, then you don't make a profit. So you have to buy something that's easy to manage.
You know, that reminded me of a good friend of mine who's actually a mortgage broker. And back in 2008, when the whole world crashed, she and her husband lived in a very, very nice house over in Winter Haven area. And, you know, everybody at that time, of course, when everything crashed, they were saying, oh, the market is terrible. You're underwater now. You owe more than the house is valued at. And, you know, she and her husband, unfortunately, they panicked. And and they could afford the monthly payments, but they panicked thinking, what are we doing paying on a house, on a loan, so much money, and it's never going to be worth this again. I mean, look at the market. It's crashing all around us. And do you know, they quit making the payments and let it foreclose. They bought a little bitty house somewhere else and they moved into it, but they let their really nice, wonderful, beautiful home foreclose and lost it. If they still had that house today, if they just kept paying it, it'd be worth more than that loan ever was on that house. So you're right about time, right? Time can heal.
Somebody asked me if that house is in Sarasota. Yes, it is. I don't Siesta Key on the water.
There you go, on the water. Goodness gracious. Michael Gary had a question for you. Michael, are you with us? You want to ask him this question? Let me see. Can you unmute yourself? I had to find you here. He may not can hear me. So Michael's question to you, John. Oh, Michael, there you are. Did you unmute yourself?
Yep. I was just wondering, John, I'm sure other investors have their own opinions, and they probably don't always align with your opinions. So I was wondering if they want to disagree with you. What are the most common disagreements that you hear from other real estate investors?
Well, I have really good friends who have taken totally different angles at this. You know, you've got to figure out what works for you. Well, I've got one friend who owns 22 mobile home parks, and he was my partner to start with. We lived in the same office. We bought properties together. I got another friend that does nothing but apartments, owns a whole bunch of apartments. I've got another student, a good friend, who owns a whole bunch of student housing. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. And there's no right or wrong way. You know, it's the way that's best for you and what fits your personality. And we all have different personalities. We all have different ways we see things. So none of these people are wrong. They're not doing it the wrong way. In fact, the one with the student housing has a net worth of $150 million right now. So they're doing pretty well. And they're my students. They had nothing when they started. So I said, do I get 10% now or what? But so you have to figure out what's good for you. What works in your town. I just wrote a newsletter about making money, whether you live in Chipley, Florida, or San Francisco. Because I've got students in Chipley and I've got students in San Francisco. They both make a lot of money, but they're totally different markets. Totally different markets. I have one of my best friends, my plane partner, lives over in Arcadia. Totally different market than Sarasota. So
Yeah.
you use different techniques in different places, but you can make a lot of money doing a lot of different things. You can buy and sell stuff. You can own mobile home parks. You can own apartments. You can own all sorts of stuff. But it's got to be good for you. You've got to know the business. Whatever it is, really get good at it. I think I'm the best landlord in my town. That's my goal. That's probably not true. There's probably other people who are better, but I'm really good at this. I'm really good at house values. I'm really good at financing. So develop some things that you're really good at, and you'll make a lot of money. You don't have to make it complicated. Just keep moving forward.
Okay, a follow-up question. You mentioned that you put out an article about making money in San Francisco and making money over here. Is there something that you read on a constant basis to get familiar with different areas of the United States?
No, I go there all the time. I've been to San Francisco 50 times. I've been to LA, I've been to Orange County 50 times. I've been all around the world. I travel a lot, not this year, but in the last 12 months, I've been to Argentina twice. I've been to Antarctica, I've been to LA, I've been to Vegas, I've been to Alaska. So I like going places. I really do like going places. And my plane is lonely. It hasn't been flown much lately, but we're going to Arkansas fishing here in a couple of weeks. So, we're just about to get back into it again. But I love going places, and I fly my own plane when I go most of the time. And by doing that, I'm able to stop and check out different markets and stop and visit with my students, because I have students in all 50 states, and I know them really well. So I stay in touch with these people who've been very successful investors, and I know the numbers. I know real numbers in San Francisco and Orange County, and then not in Antarctica. I didn't see many houses down there. But, it was a really interesting place to go if you've never been there. Really interesting place to go.
Thank you.
Yep. And it's not an article, it's a newsletter. I've been writing a newsletter since 1979. It's 6 pages long. I write it 6 times a year. And, it talks specifically about what's working right now. So, if you want to get into this business, it's a really cheap way, $47 a year to get constant information. You get it 6 times a year, and it's 6 pages long. So it'll take you a couple hours to read it.
Okay.
And they can get
Is that on your website, John?
On my website. It's on my website. 2 things you should all do, and don't want to be an ad, but you should read my book, and you should subscribe to that newsletter for a year and see if it makes you money. And if it does, subscribe for another year. I've got several 40-year subscribers, so some of them make good money.
Yeah, the one that's making 150 million. What age did he start investing?
It's a young woman. She came to our class. She was divorced in her 20s with 2 young kids, and she had no money. So she started in her 20s.
Wow.
And you don't have to be in your 20s to start making that either. You could be much older. I have friends that have done that late in their life. I myself started late in life. And so, just know that it's possible at any age at all, any situation.
Sure.
Now, if anybody's got questions, just speak up. You don't have to put it in the chat. You don't have to just all ask questions and keep it going, but you all can anytime. You can raise your hand or you can just jump in. I'm thrilled for y'all to be participating. You know that.
Yeah.
Well, if someone's unmuting themselves, I have a quick question.
Okay.
You had a quote, it doesn't have to be your money to make money. It was Charles, and I didn't get the last name.
Charles Ray Considine, Considine, Considine. He's dead, but he was really sharp, and he was law student. He's a lawyer. Went to Harvard, CPA, had a big accounting firm in San Diego, Considine and Considine. His son still runs it, Tim Considine. He had 12 kids, and one of them was a senator or congressman from might have been a senator from Colorado, but it's a very successful family, obviously, and just bright people, and they just did a lot of things right.
Thank you.
Christian has a good question over here. Christian, do you want to ask him? Because I think this is a great question here. Unmute yourself if you would. There's a lot of beginners that are on here, and I think they'd love to hear John explain this. Christian, tell us what you want to know.
Hey, so I've heard a lot about seller financing, and it sounds like a very convenient option if you're the investor. I still don't understand it completely, like the pros and cons. And if I were to use it, how would I like pitch it to the seller?
Have you read books on it, Christian? Have you read books? Have you taken the seminars? Have you taken courses? Have you learned about owner financing?
I've read a little bit about other stuff, but I got a book for free that's called Your Money Down. I haven't been able to read it, but
So if you read a little bit about flying my airplane, you think I'd let you fly my airplane? You know,
I've read books, but the one on financing, yeah, it's just
yeah. You know, I've got a full, I've got a 13 one-day classes I've recorded, and one of them is on owner financing, and it's the best one I've ever done. So if you want to listen to me for 6 hours talk about the nuts and bolts of owner financing, you should do that. $149, 6 hours. It doesn't get any cheaper than that. You just hire me by the hour. It's $250 an hour. But you present an offer to somebody who has a reason to sell to you with owner financing. That's why I talk about high equity places. That's why I talk about people who've been there for a long time. I target folks who've been in houses for a while, in neighborhoods for a while, because I know that the neighborhoods. For example, when we have a lot of foreclosures, if you study your town, you'll find most of them in certain areas of town. Okay, there are other areas of town there's no foreclosures. Well, why are there no foreclosures in some parts of town?
they're good.
Because nobody owes any money. All those houses are free and clear, or they have very low payments, right? They're not in risk. They're not losing houses. There are no short sales in those areas. So it's just common sense when you think about it. If you go to an area where there's a lot of short sales and foreclosures, most of those people have no equity. That doesn't mean you can't buy those houses. You can certainly buy those houses, but you're not likely to buy those houses with owner financing. If you go to an area where people have a lot of equity and they have more than one house sometimes, and they've sold one house and they bought another one, or they just bought another house and haven't sold theirs yet, now they've got a reason to sell to somebody and finance it. They don't have to have the cash because they've already bought the next house, and they don't want to put the money in the bank in most cases. Let me just give you a really short answer. Find somebody else who's an investor who's about 80 years old who owns 5 houses and go make them an owner financing offer and see what happens. Did you get that?
Yeah, I got it.
Now, why would somebody 80 years old sell you 5 houses with owner financing? Why would I, if I'm 80, why would I sell you 5 good houses with owner financing?
Probably because you're gonna die soon.
Let's hope not. Let's hope not. Give me another reason. Yes, again. That's wrong. Give me another reason.
Probably.
Calm down, Adrian. Calm
You
down.
want to handle the maintenance of all 5 houses.
They don't want to handle the maintenance. They don't want to manage. What else might they like? What do they get with owner financing?
Cash. I mean, yeah.
Did you pay attention to what I just said here about 20 minutes ago? That if I sold a house for $275 and carried back a note, what my cash flow would look like compared to the rent? It'd be almost 3 times the rent, almost 3 times as much cash flow. So if you're 80 years old, let's put yourself in that position. You'll be there in about 60 years. When you're 80 years old, maybe you'll have 5 free and clear houses, and maybe you don't want to rent them anymore. So you sell them to some young guy and you finance them for him. And is a young guy happy? Yeah, because he's doing all the work. He can buy them with a low down payment. The old guy's happy because he gets up payments. He doesn't have to do the work anymore. So it's a way to convert your profits to cash flow and doing it wisely. And most people in the real estate business would much rather do that than sell and put the money in the bank, because then what do you get? Nothing. 1%. Let's say you had $1 million worth of equity and you put the $1 million in the bank. How much interest do you get the first year?
I'm sorry, repeat the question real quick.
$1 million in equity in houses. Would you be happy with that? You got $1 million in equity in houses and you sell them and you end up with $1 million net cash after taxes, and you put the $1 million in the bank and you buy a CD. How much cash flow would you have the first year?
Nothing. Negative.
What's 2% of $1 million?
20,000.
That's right. You'd have $20,000 a year in income off your $1 million. How do you feel?
Ripped off.
Awful, awful. That was the dumbest thing I've ever done because I had $1 million. Let's just say that's 10 houses that are in for $1,000 a month. You had $10,000 a month in gross income before, which maybe it only is $5,000 a month. There's a whole bunch more than $20,000 a year, isn't it? Whole bunch more than 20,000 a year. So make it easy. Find some old guy. Well, all the old people raise their hands that are on this show. Find some old person who owns some houses that's ready to get out of this business and go make them an offer. You might want to buy them a cup of coffee first, but make them an offer.
Hey John, how do you handle like an objection like for seller financing if they want 20% down and you only want to give them 5%?
Well, you offer them what you have. You say, look, I'd give you 20% down if I had it. I can save it up and try to give you more later, but all I have today is 5% down. If you want to sell me your house with 5% down, I'm happy to talk to you. If not, good luck. And here's my number. Call me back if you still have it in 6 months. Sometimes they do call you back in 6 months. Sometimes they still
They
have it.
absolutely do. They absolutely will call. I've had one call me back even a year or more later.
Yeah.
And say, hey, I'm ready.
How many houses are there in great Imperial County, Imperial County, you think? You think there's like 10,000 houses?
More.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, maybe 20,000 houses? Maybe 100,000 houses? There are a lot of houses out there. So, and if you think about what percentage of those houses are empty, if it's just 1% are empty, there's thousands of empty houses in your county. So now you narrow it down to neighborhoods where you want to buy, if you're smart, and buy the right house. But if you'll do that, there's a lot of opportunity to make owner financing offers. And if you're just starting, you're not going to buy every one you make, right? I've had a lot of students call me up and a year later they said, well, it took us a whole year to buy our first house. We made like 30 offers. And I said, did you learn anything? They said, yeah, we learned a lot. Okay, you learned a lot. So go out and make some offers, but be smart about it. The smarter you can be, Christian, you find somebody who has equity, probably who has an empty house, and probably is not 25 years old. They're probably 75 years old, much more better chance. And if they're an investor, they're already thinking that way. They're already thinking cash flow.
We have a question from Greg Martin. Greg, can you unmute yourself and let's ask John your question. You had it over in the chat side.
Yeah, thanks for sharing tonight, John. I was just curious if you get deals that don't fit your criteria, because you seem like you have a very precise thing for what you're looking for. Do you still get those deals and wholesale them or anything, or do you just pass on those and leave those for another investor then? Yeah,
I can barely hear you, but everybody else hear the question. He said, if I find a deal that I don't want, but it's a good deal, what do I do with it? I generally give it to somebody. Sometimes they'll give me a tip, but I rarely get involved in putting it under contract. In fact, I'll say never. I've never done it. I've never put it under contract and flipped a contract to somebody. But I will call up somebody who I know. And here's a scenario that makes a lot of sense to me. Somebody did call me up. There was a house that I didn't really want. It was an okay house. It was a 3-2 with a double car garage. It just wasn't in my neighborhoods. And the guy would sell it with a fairly low down payment and finance it. And I didn't want that house. So I called up a buddy of mine who I thought might want that house. And he went out and looked at it. He said, yeah, I want that house. He said, well, I don't have the down payment. And I said, okay, I'll put up the down payment. You buy the house, you do all the work. We'll split the profits when we get out of this deal. And so that worked. So, I'd much rather have half interest in the profits in something than a $1,000 or $5,000 finder's fee.
Makes sense.
That actually leads to another question of someone asked about, would you expound on partial interest and different ways to partner with someone that, because this is a new person starting out and they're not sure.
Well, if they're a new person starting out, they probably shouldn't even go there. It's 8:45 at night. If they're a new person starting out, they're not going to like my answer. But you can own a piece of a property. You don't have to own the whole thing. And once you get your head around that, and the simplest example is the one I just gave you, where the guy needed it's just called a $10,000 down payment. He didn't have it. And I put up to $10,000 and I said to him, you can have all the cash flow, both positive and negative. I don't want any of the cash flow in this house, but when we sell it, I want my 10 grand back and half the profit we make. Well, that's a pretty simple deal, isn't it? The piece I own is half the profit. How do you write that down? Well, I can write it down a lot of different ways. I could have an option to buy half interest, or he could have an option to buy me out for the $10,000, or we could go entitled together, and he could lease it from me. So there's different paperwork we could use to achieve that the result. But the important part is understanding the concept that you don't have to own the whole house, and maybe you don't want to own the whole house. You know, maybe you just want to own the piece of it that goes up, or if you're on the other side, you want the piece of it that has cash flow. I have one house that I've owned for 20 years now, and I own the whole thing, and I net lease it to a guy who's an investor here in town. He writes me a check every month. He takes care of everything. He's put a roof on this house. He's put new central air in it. He's put new windows and carpet in it. He keeps all the rent, and I get half the profit when we sell, or he gets half the profit. I get my money back, which is about 100 grand on this house. And then he gets half the profit and I get half the profit. But in the meantime, I just get a check every month, and I've never, you know, I have seen the house. I've driven by it. I've never been inside it, and I've never met a tenant, and I never will.
Perfect.
Well,
And I know that from going to a lot of Pete's classes, there's a lot of sharing in y'all's classes, especially the more advanced we get as investors, and we start learning about all the creative ways that you can do those kind of things. It's very valuable to go and really hear how Pete and John and others have done this. And you get real examples, and you get absolute steps on how to do that. I think that's a great idea for those.
Well, and you know, at different points in your life, Liz, you're ready for different things. You know, there's an old expression,
right.
when the student is ready, the teacher will come.
Mhm.
And I can tell you all sorts of deals now, but some people who are fairly new to the business, it'll just go right over their head because they're not ready for it yet. And that's why I encourage people, you know, to start with the basics, learn the basics, and then work your way up. I still learn. You know, I'm in this business because I'm still learning, and I've been doing it a long time, but I'm still looking for new ideas, and I'm still looking for new ways to make money. So it's a never-ending quest. It's a lot of fun.
I think that was one of the things two things about what you just said are so true. One is the first class I ever went to, Pete Fortunato's, I went way too soon. And my head blew up about after the third hour of being in his class. I mean, literally, I thought I needed a helmet to hold my brain in. It was just so overwhelming. The amount of information, I thought, I'll never learn all this. You know, it was almost disappointing. I'm an eternal optimist, so I didn't give up, and I kept going to his classes, and I kept trying. But I'm just saying to you, you're right. I wasn't ready for that. It was too much for me. The second thing is, that you just mentioned is, well, I just wanted to point out about that education. I think, like you advised Christian, do some very basic things. Buy a book, you know, start reading, start doing those very basic things. I think sometimes we forget when we go to these different seminars and people are trying to tell us all the different kinds of ways you can do it, but you have to get started and just start with the simplest thing. One thing, John, is when I was first starting out, I was advised by my mentor at the time, start learning my area. Like you said, pick your area that you want to invest in. And then I drove up and down that area, all the streets. I knew every house on every block. Do you advise your students to do that type of thing? I mean, and of course, learning values, like you said earlier. Are there any other things they should do right away to get started? Things?
Yeah, but you know, back in the 70s, even I was telling people to take a map and draw a circle on that map in where they think they want to invest, and then don't drive, Liz. You miss too many cars into places when you drive. Get out of your car and walk those streets. Walk those streets. It's good for you. It's healthier. Plus, you get to actually talk to people. You meet people. You'll meet the mayor of the neighborhood. There's always some old geezer sitting out in the front yard in a lawn chair, or you know, and they will know. I won't say it's not a gender specific thing, but they'll know a lot about the neighborhood. They'll know who's getting divorced. They'll know who died. They'll know who's just moved in. They'll know whose kids are rowdy and whose aren't. You know, they'll know everything about that neighborhood. And you find those people, you learn a lot about it, and sometimes you buy their house, you know. Sometimes you find out they want to sell. One of my funniest stories is that I bought this house one time, and the guy next door was a junk collector. And I mean, he was a world-class junk collector. This guy had a forklift. He'd move his stuff around in his yard. It was that busy a place, you know. And so I'm over there one day, and he comes up to my property line. He said, I bet you don't like me. And I said, you know, I don't dislike you. I bought this house real cheap because it was next door to yours. And And this is a waterfront house in a nice neighborhood. I want you to know this is not a out in the woods someplace. This is a nice house in a nice neighborhood. He said, well, here's the good news. I'm going to sell this house. And I said, well, that is good news. And he did. And I was over there one day and the garbage truck would pull up and they'd open up the back of the garbage truck and he'd take that forklift and load it full of junk and put it in the garbage truck. You know, he had a real operation. But and he sold that house, and the people who bought that house spent $200,000 or $300,000 on it, and it is really pretty right now, and it's right next door to the house I bought cheap. So you know, there's some funny stories.
Yeah, I have another question.
Yes.
You mentioned that you manage all your properties, and you have and by the looks of it, you have a lot of them. Why do you manage them yourselves, and why like you wouldn't hire a property manager?
Well, I'm good at it.
Good question.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. Yeah, I'm good at it, you know, and I like doing it. I really like selecting tenants. You know, when you rent a house to somebody, it's a negotiation, and I like that experience, that negotiation experience. I probably, if you figure out what I'm best at, is negotiating, and that doesn't mean I'm just beating up on people. It means I can read people, and I know which way they're going, and I know what offer they'll take, and you know, it's a learned skill. You know, it's a learned skill. But I enjoy it. I'm good at it, and I know what it costs me to hire somebody else to manage, and it's not just a commission. We went around the room in our mastermind group here 2 years ago and said, and I asked everybody to write down the percentage of the gross income they think disappeared when they hired a manager, and everybody came up with about the same number. It was between 20 and 25%, 20 to 25%.
Goodness.
That's what it costs you to hire somebody else to manage your property, unless they are exceptionally good. I know there's somebody on the call tonight that's a property manager, but if they're exceptionally good and they put in long-term tenants and they focus on long-term tenants, not people who will pay the most rent. You see, most property managers get paid based on gross income. So if they can get more rent, they make more money, and they also get a percentage of the maintenance fees. Well, if you're paying a guy or person to manage your property and you pay them based on gross income, they're more likely to rent it to 5 college kids than a family who can't pay that much money. And you'll get a lot more gross income. But then when the kids move out, you'll have to rehab the house. So now they get paid a percentage of the fees to fix the house up. So the incentives are in the wrong place sometimes when you hire professional management. So if you hire professional management, make sure the incentives are in the right place. Penalize them if somebody moves out short term. You know, don't let them rent to somebody who moves out in a year or two, because that costs you money. If a tenant doesn't stay 3 years in a house, you don't make a dime. They've got to stay 3 years. So you know, you got to be smart enough to understand that. And a lot of property managers think a 1-year lease is a good deal. It's not a good deal. You need long-term folks.
That's a good point. I don't think I've ever heard that before, as far as having a penalty put in place for property manager. I think that's a great thought about that. Thank you. Dory DeLuca, did you have a question? I saw your little hand come up there for a second. Oh, you're muted. You got to unmute yourself, Dory. Yeah, there you go.
There we go. I'm leaning back, so that's why my head's not in the picture.
That's okay. You just disappeared.
She's thinking.
I laugh and my feet are up and I'm comfortable. I have a question about the seller financing. I've been having some difficulty trying to negotiate it, probably because the properties are so expensive now. The only way to make it work is if the amortization schedule is long. And they look at me and they say, oh my God, that's a long time. And I try to convince them, oh, you can leave it to your kids or your grandkids, and it doesn't seem to work. I don't know. Pete's shaking his head no. So what works?
Well, you have to be in front of the right people. You know, if the people are not motivated to sell to you, and I rank people on a scale of 1 to 10, you know, and most people never find a 10. Most people are buying from people who are like 4 or 5 on my scale. And a 4 or 5 is somebody who wants to sell their house, and they'll take an offer when they can, but they don't have to sell their house. You know, they live in their house. They're happy living in their house. They just like to sell their house for a bunch of money and then buy another house. And those folks are really hard to buy from. But a 10 is somebody who has an empty house, who will give you title to their house, and who will write you a check to take the title. And I've had a number of people do that. They've paid me to take the house off their hand. So that's kind of reverse on the financing, where they pay you, you don't have to pay them anything. So there's all sorts of people in between the 5 and the 10. But what the offer you're making, if it's just 30-year amortized, you're scaring people with 30 years. What you should be talking about is flexible payments, where your payments may be in the first 5 years a little bit lower, and common sense would say, look, I can only pay you money that I collect from the rent. I'm not going to go into my pocket to buy your house. So if the net rent every month is $1,000, that's the most I can afford to pay you. Now, as rents go up over time, I could afford to pay you more. So if we could start the house off with payments of $1,000 for the first 5 years, and then maybe go to $1,100 for 5 years, and maybe go to $1,200 for 5 years, and pay you off and pay 15 years or 10 years and see how that works out. But talk to people like that and talk about why you need the long term. And you don't really need 30 years. I mean, it's nice to have 30 years, but most people don't. How long does it take to pay off a 30-year loan?
15 years.
No, it takes one day. It takes like 15 minutes. You just call the bank and pay them off. Okay? It doesn't really take long at all. So that 30-year loan, you have an option on your money for 30 years, and they're pretty excited about that. But if it's the right deal, and these people need to sell, and that's what I'm looking for. I said this earlier, but I said, if I feel that these people are going to make somebody else a really good deal, they might as well make me a really good deal. I might as well be the person they sell to, because I'm more flexible than anybody else they're going to find. I'm the most flexible buyer they're going to find. If they really need more money, I'll probably go out and find them more money. If they really need higher payments, then we're going to have to do something to compensate me. It's either, and it's not going to be short term, because high payments and short term doesn't make any sense. But it might be maybe no payments for the house I just bought. The last house I bought, the people carried back a no payments for 12 months. They called me up 6 months later and said, we need a little money now. And I said, I'll give you a little money now. And I said, what will you do for me? They said, well, we'll make it no payments for 2 years. So people will negotiate that. People will accept no payments for a while. But it's a matter of talking to people, finding out what they need. And again, there's thousands of houses around where you live. You can't buy them all. You just want to buy one at a time. And every time you buy one, it's a little seminar. You'll learn what people will do. And when you make somebody an offer, if you offer people $10,000 down and they say no, 20, and that's still within your price range, and you say, well, if I give you 20 down, my payments have to be lower for me to afford this. You've got some reason to talk about different numbers. So,
thank you. That's a great idea.
You're welcome.
Very good.
I'll
Very
do one
good.
more question, Liz. I told my wife I'd leave here at 9 o'clock, and that's 2 minutes now. So one more question.
My gosh.
One really good one.
Okay. Let's see. I don't know. Chris Lund, you've always got good questions. Chris Lund, bring us home. What have you got for us, Chris? Chris is an experienced investor. He's been around PCREIA for a long time. Great guy. Chris, I know you got something really awesome here.
You're on the spot, Chris. Say something.
I do.
No, I don't like being under the gun. I think a lot of the beginners want the easy questions. I got the more. I'm the seasoned investor. You talked a little bit about self-insuring, and it's hard to find people that will share a lot of the details of doing that. It's something I've been very interested in, but it's hard to know. What do you do to limit your risks, and what kind of, what are some of the ways that you go about doing the self-insuring, and then maybe too, if you can kick it in. I'd love to know a little bit. You didn't talk at all about what you do to keep income taxes low, if anything special. I'd love to hear your point of view on both of those things.
Okay. Well, it's a longer answer than I'm willing to give you tonight, but let's take it reverse.
I was afraid of that.
No, I'm going to give you an answer, but I'm just saying that, we could talk for an hour on this topic, but income taxes, I paid no income taxes at all. I was like Donald Trump. I paid no income taxes at all for the first 30 years in this business. Today I pay income taxes. And the reason I pay income taxes is my property's pretty much all paid for. Plus I have a bunch of other income. I have, but I don't tell you that I like paying income taxes, but it doesn't bother me as much as I thought it would, because I have a ton of income. And once you get to the point where you look at the percentage of your income that you're paying, and the percentage of the income that I'm paying is still way under 20%, it's like 15%. So there's a lot left over. So if you get to keep 85 cents on the dollar, that's not bad. And, you know, we live in a country where it is so easy to make money compared to most places that it's well worth the price. It's well worth paying a 15% premium to be in this country rather than, you know, if you're down in Argentina or someplace trying to do this, you would not make any money. On the self-insurance part, you know, I do carry liability insurance on everything, but what I self-insure is the properties where the land is worth more than the property, more than I paid for it. For example, the last 2 houses I bought for less than the land value. So I really don't have anything invested in those houses at all. The houses I have on the water, and I have a number of houses out on the Keys on the water I bought over the years, they're all tear downs. I mean, these are houses that were concrete blocks, terrazzo floor houses built back in the 50s. And whoever I sell to is just going to bulldoze the house. So I don't care if the house burns down, it just saves somebody bulldozing it, you know. But as a practical matter, we you know, keep the houses in good shape. We've never had a house burn down. Been doing it a long time. I've never had a house flood. I've never had a house blow away. So I'm a little braver, and of course I can afford to be. You know, if we don't carry any windstorm, so if all my roofs blow off next week, if every one of them blew off, I have enough money in the bank to write a check and put all those roofs back on. And I think I'll get the roofer to work for me first because I've got the money to pay him right now. I don't have to wait for the insurance money to come in, and we can go out and I can say, put the roofs on, do it quick. So at some level, you've got the ability to self-insure and sleep well. You know, if you cancel your insurance and now you can't sleep, you did something wrong. Get your insurance back. But at some point, and the nice thing about the house business is you don't have to self-insure all of them. You self-insure a couple. And I still do carry, I don't carry flood or wind, but I still carry fire on a lot of my houses because it's really cheap. You know, a couple $100 a year for fire insurance. And that's the most likely problem to have is some tenant that sets the house on fire. And the 3 fires I've had, they've all been the tenants setting the house on fire. That's how they get on fire. You know, it's not lightning, it's tenants. So is that enough of an answer at 9 o'clock at night?
Oh, we go to 1 o'clock in the morning, so we're just getting started.
I don't. But did I help you there, Chris? Did I give you enough of an answer there to help you?
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah. I mean, you know, there's some houses you own, probably been doing this for a long time, that are paid for, and you know, you can take the risk for not insuring a house if the lot's worth a lot. You know, if most of the value is in the lot. So I have a whole bunch of houses where 80% or 90% of the value is in the lot, and some of it's 100% in the lot. The house really isn't worth anything at all. So not to not insure that house doesn't. I'm not taking much of a risk. You get that? I mean, that's the risk management side.
I've kind of seen the numbers, and in 20 years, what I pay in insurance and I don't have in my entire claims in 20 years is probably less than what I pay in taxes in 1 year.
Yep.
Like, wow, that's a lot to keep paying, and
it is.
But you also worry about now, you know, but the liability, I have heard that before, and that is something good. You just get rid of all the insurance, but get liability only.
You have to have liability, or somebody will pick on you. You know, because if they pick on you, what you got is prepaid lawyer fees here, and you get to hire a lawyer without paying a check.
Yeah, and what you said about the income taxes, I actually had an accountant tell me exactly. He said, when you make that much money, don't be upset paying that much in taxes. That's the way it goes. Like, just be happy you're making that much money. So,
well, I can tell you how not to pay any taxes at all, but you know, it's foolish. I had one of my best friends who was very, very wealthy investor here in town, and I had lunch together every Wednesday for years and years. His name was Jack, and everybody knew Jack had money. Nobody knew I had money because I don't tell people. But they come over and they talk to Jack, and they say, Jack, how do you avoid paying taxes? He said, I buy airplanes. And the guy said, well, I have an airplane. Jack says, you have a airplane? So go buy a couple more. So buy a jet or two. You know, if you're paying a lot of taxes, you buy an airplane, you can write it off over 5 years. My friend Jimmy Napier went out and bought a whole bunch of buses so he wouldn't pay taxes. Well, you know, there's good news and bad news. You know, a 10-year-old bus isn't worth what a new bus is, and a 10-year-old airplane is not worth what a new airplane is. So, you know, you got to pick your poison. I would rather just pay the tax and have the leftover money. Then go out and buy railroad cards or oil wells or all the silly things you can do to avoid paying taxes. So there's a lot of tax shelters out there still available, but you know, they're generally not money makers. You know, the best tax shelter you've got is pension plans, and we didn't even talk about that tonight. But you know, I've got a retirement plan that about a third of my assets are in. Well, all that money's tax free, and so that's a significant deal. So.
John, before you finish, I want to make sure that you saw in the chat that Ken Meadows said that Clyde Wilson said hello. He tried to get on, but the poor internet connection in his condo.
Can I ask one question? I've been really patient with my hands up. Could you have 1 second to ask one question?
Okay, go.
Thank you.
I'll
So
get
real
my
quickly,
beauty
from a
sleep
person,
tomorrow.
I hear you. One person that's been in the business as long as you have, and I appreciate all the information, is how do you know how much equity you should have on a house when you purchase it? So like, should the house have X amount percentage of equity? Like, what should I look for when looking at?
Well, in my book, I have a rule of thumb I call 10-10-10. And I say you should buy at least 10% below the market with no more than 10% down and not pay more than 10% interest. And people laugh and they say, well, 10% interest seems pretty high. And I say, well, you'd be surprised how many people pay more than 10% interest. I mean, the hard money lenders in this town are charging 14%. So if you borrow from the wrong people, you're paying more than 10% interest. So if that helps, at least 10% below the market with 10% down. That doubles your money going in. So if you buy a $100,000 house for 90 with $9,000 down, you're in effect have made 100% return on your money going in. And of course, now you've got a smaller loan, which is key to having some cash flow. And that's what you really have to work on is how much of a loan do I have and what are the payments on that loan? And can I safely afford it? You know, can my tenants afford to pay it? And if my tenants move out, do I have enough money to make the payments till I get some new tenants?
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank
Boy,
you.
Rosemary, you really got away with something right there. Let me tell you, you slid right under there. John, you're very
sneaky.
generous.
You're sneaky.
I know she is. She's going to be a good investor, right?
I was being very patient. I was being a good girl today.
Patience is good. Patience is the key to this business. You know, I like to fish, and fishermen have to be patient because there's days you don't catch any fish, right? I mean, there's some days you can go weeks and not catch fish. Then you get in a good spot and catch a bunch of fish.
I just go for the water, just to play in the water, and if I catch a fish, that's bonus.
Yeah. But the key to catching fish is going where the fish are and where they're biting, right? That's the key. Real estate's a little bit like that. The key to buying real estate is to going where the deals are and then making offers. Okay, good night, everybody. It's been a lot of fun. And
what a great way to wrap that up, John. I so appreciate it. We're grateful to you. Every moment we had with you tonight was wonderful, and I thank you so much. We hope that folks will sign up for the class coming up. And Peter Fortunato, who is the other side of that class that he and John are putting on, that John is putting on, is here on the group. And Pete, hopefully you'll stay for a few minutes after the time, and maybe some of these folks that had some other questions, we can get to those answers as well. Thank you, John. Once again, we're so grateful to you. Thank you so much.
Let me just say one thing as I'm leaving here. You have to sign up in advance. We're not going to let anybody walk in at the door. We've got restrictions on how many people can sit in this room. And you have to wear a mask if you come. So Republican or not, you still have to wear a mask.
All right.
Only two people in the room that aren't going to have masks on. That's Peter and I. Everybody else going to have a mask on.
Thank you, John. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. We sure do appreciate you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Good night, John.
All be well.
Everybody else, please stay on if you would. Of course, the meeting is officially over, so now you have permission to leave if you need or want to. But for all those that would like to stay, we'll try to get your questions answered that you had over in the chat, and hopefully more questions that you've even come up with since then. So,
Liz,
there you go.
We have a few questions here that I think that between the group we could probably answer. One of them I see is from Michael about how did John determine 3 years as a profit point for rentals? And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's because of the turnover. Between paint, carpet, the vacancy time. You lose if you only have it rented for 1 year. All the profit gets put into the turnover time. So it takes 3 years without a vacancy to actually make money.
I've long said, and I think this is true, I've long said that my numbers bear out that if I rent a house to somebody for 1 year, with the cost, time, expense of moving people in, moving people out, doing the paperwork, etc., 1 year is break even for me. If they rent for 1 year and they leave, I'm not losing, but I'm not making anything. I'm working for free for that year. When they stay past that, now I start to make a profit. And I'm hoping, like Liz said, we can get Pete to start taking questions now. Let's go from one guru to another. Come on, Pete. Let's beat
So
him
let
up.
me ask you a question real quick, Chris, because you elaborate on that a little bit. Are you taking into consideration a loan or mortgage payment, or you got financing? What are you taking into consideration as far as expenses?
Yeah, that was sorted out a long time ago, and I didn't, it's not a hard, fast thing, but it just seems in the ballpark is, yeah, by the time I do taxes and insurance and mortgage payments, what's left over is not a whole lot. And if somebody leaves in 1 year, I'm losing that just on the, getting the house ready to rent it again, having it empty for a little while, whatever. Now it's, sometimes that goes smoother and better than other times. Some people do more damage than others, but on average, that's a break-even point that I think it, comes out pretty accurate for me.
That's
Thank
good.
you.
That's you're above the average of what I normally hear. That's awesome.
But definitely, short-term people cost you money. You make money when they stay. I think we all know that. And Pete, I'm sure says that. John says that. All of the gurus say that. There's no doubt about it. That not just the money either, but the burnout. You get tired of. You don't want empty houses all the time, or ever really. But
Do you
I'm gonna
generally,
shut up and try to get Pete to answer.
do you
I think Michael had a question. Michael?
do you generally always change the carpet, repaint the whole interior, and do all those extensive renovations when somebody moves out after 1 year? I would think that's a little bit overkill.
So maybe we can do it too. I'll answer, and then maybe Pete can answer too. What kind of, is that fair? So because it's good too, because Pete and I have two different perspectives. My properties are more lower income than Pete and then John Schaub's properties are. I started with lower income properties because that was all I could afford. They had to make cash flow from day one. I didn't understand exactly some of the things I know now, maybe about getting owner financing and trying to stretch that to make payments work. What I understood was when I had a $200,000 house, I got 35 houses. My small bread and butter houses in working class neighborhoods, 30 of them provide me a really nice income, and I'm set for life. I have a couple big fancy houses. If I had 30 of them, I would have needed 6 jobs to keep up with the payments because they didn't make money. As far as the carpet and the paint goes, I hear people say that. I don't, that's not my experience. The carpet, if it looks decent and it isn't horrible, if animals didn't pee in it or stuff like that, I generally have the carpets cleaned professionally every time somebody moves out, and I'll keep using them. Now, if they're nasty, then yeah, I'll replace them. I don't go back in with carpet a lot anymore. In the early years, I did sometimes, but now I generally try to go to stuff that's going to hold up better and last longer. If it's block houses, I want ceramic tile. If it's frame houses, then I'll probably go with some kind of laminate or something. And the painting, if I can clean it up and make it look nice, then I'm going to clean it up and make it look nice. Every now and then, do we got to repaint some of the insides? Yeah, sure. Not every year or 2 or 3 even, but maybe 5 to 10 years, I definitely probably do. Sometimes I just got to repaint a room or two. Sometimes I got to repaint a lot. What I try to do is, in the early years, I kept paint in my garage for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 houses. Now I'm like, there was no room anymore. So I leave the paint at the houses. I tell the tenant, look, if you'll keep this paint inside and somewhere that's out of the way, when you leave, I can use it to do my touch-up painting and stuff, and it'll cost you a lot less money. If you get rid of this paint, I got to repaint the whole house because I can't touch up the spots. I don't have the paint that matches. Most of them leave it, and I can touch up. I've gotten really good at touching up. You got a few spots or whatever, you feather your paint out away from it, paint the spot, feather it out, and I can do touch-up painting and get away with a lot and still have them look nice. But I'm gonna let Pete talk about nicer houses and what he does.
All right. Okay, well, I'm gonna come on because Chris has certainly been insistent. Our houses, we've gone up. When I was 35 years old, I had 33 houses. Gene and I had 4 kids. The oldest of them was 10, and we really needed to make sure we spent as much time with the kids as we could to overcome the bad influence of the school system. So we spent our time with our kids, which meant we wanted to spend less time on the properties. So we boiled the 33 houses that we owned down to 22 better houses that required less management. Tenants stayed longer and involved less of our time. My average tenant is about 10 years. I absolutely consider it a failure if my tenant didn't stay 3. I mean, it would be just awful. My cost over the years has averaged $3,500 each time I have a turnover. I suspect that would be more today, but I have not had a lot of turnover. And it's not because any tenants been malicious in my houses. I got great neighborhoods which encourage good people. But indeed, when people move out and they take the pictures off the wall and you see that, gee, that's a different color where the square where the picture was, unless the tenant coming in is going to put their pictures in precisely the same spot, it's not going to work. So we're going to clean and paint. I try to explain to people that the spots on the carpet is to show them where to place their furniture. But it's easier for me if a tenant moves out to shine that house, because a part of putting a great tenant in there is to strike them with how nice a house it is you're offering them. So that's been important for us. We've had tenants not last 5 years, but that is a rarity. I've got a couple of new tenants because we bought some houses and made some pretty dramatic changes this year. Did more things in this 2020 than I've done in any one year in a long, long time, because I'm trying to adjust to what's changed out there. But Chris also asked about the self-insurance. And a good friend of mine who happened to have 1,200 houses in 1999, or even earlier than that, 1989, he found that his quarterly insurance bill was $53,000. And when he saw the $53,000 bill on his desk, after grabbing his heart, trying to prevent the heart attack, he called his sons and said, look, your job, kids, is to buy a house for $53,000 in cash every 90 days. He said, I hope you'll buy a $70,000 house, but even if you buy a $50,000 house, I want you to buy a house for 50 grand, pay 53 grand, pay all cash, and I'm going to cancel our insurance except for liability. And when he talked to me, it was 2003. And he had been doing that for 14 years. And in 14 years, without any inflation adjusting, just his kids buying a house every 90 days for $53,000 cash, he had bought 56 houses. And he'd lost one house to a fire, and he'd had one $20,000 fire. So he felt that he was up 54 and a half houses by self-insuring. That very next year, I canceled my insurance as of 2004. And my insurance at that time was $33,000 per year. I never had a claim ever, or had anything that I would have claimed. And I was very proud of myself until Hurricane Irma. And thank God Hurricane Irma was not the first year I self-insured, because that was very expensive. And I've had nothing since then. So I have self-insured. I did it because of the example of a guy who'd gone before me, and that's what I did. Okay, the other thing I'd like to talk about for a minute is that there was some questions about seller financing.
Yeah,
seller
thank
financing
you.
is so much better for everybody that it's just a case of Americans are stupid and they don't pay attention. And so I'll give you an example. That's last week in Clearwater. A couple were referred to me. I did not know them. They were referred to me, and they had a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2,700 square foot house with a pool that they had for 40 years. It was free and clear. It was exactly what John's talking about. Problem was, it was a pool house. So it's not a rental property I want because of the liability of it. So they are retired, and they have about, and they didn't tell me exactly, but they said about $1,200 each in Social Security that they're living on. And they're finding living in that house, taking care of that house, taking care of the property, providing the pool service on the $2,400 in income is hurting them. So they decided to sell the house. One of their neighbors offered them $350,000 cash. It's a code section 121, so there's no taxes. So the result of that was they were going to have $350,000 in cash, which they were going to put in the bank. The bank is paying 1/10 of 1%. That's $29.83 a month additional interest income to add to the $2,400 a month. So I had a buyer who's a friend of mine who's self-employed, so he can't get financing because the institutions think self-employed means unemployed. Offer them $350,000, not 1 cent down, at 3%, $1,500 a month until paid. So they got 30 times the interest, and they got $1,500 a month, which only lasts 30 years, but is still much better than $29.83. And the reason that they did it is somebody cared enough to talk to them and find out where they were. They were going to take that money and be satisfied with $29.83, which means then what would they do is they'd invade principal, and in 10 years they'd be out of money, or in 12 years they'd be out of money. And that is a common problem that people face, and no one bothers to sit and talk with them about the alternatives. And seller financing is a remarkable alternative for a lot of people.
Thank you for sharing that. That's very critical.
I think from what I'm hearing from a lot of what Pete said and John said, that I think a lot of people confuse, or when we're looking for seller financing, it's the type of person, not that we just want to get seller financing. How do we convince the person to get seller financing? We need the type of person that can benefit from seller financing. And that's what we should be going after, not just every single house and assuming we can get seller financing. And they maybe, there's creative ways to get it, but the easier ways are properties that are set up to benefit the seller.
Right. And your goal is not to get seller financing. Your goal is to help somebody. When you get to a door, you're surprised by people and you don't know what problem they're going to have, but they have some problem. Hence my question about why would you sell a nice house like this? And I've found people who just had twins and need more space. I found an old lady who couldn't handle the stairs in her house anymore. I found retired couples who, like this couple I just talked about in Clearwater, they needed 3 little houses, so they still had an estate for their kids, and they had 2 rentals and a littler house to live in. And all of those things were different. I found a lady who I paid off her car, which gave her enough income so she didn't lose her house. So when you knock on the door, there's a surprise coming. And your job is to care about the people and then help them.
Love it.
Rosemary had a question. Rosemary, I saw your hand was up. Rosemary?
A little slow here today, apparently. Well, I had a question, but I was wondering, first of all, if you had a contact information, because I have a couple of questions. But one of the questions was regarding your being self-insured. I'm assuming you suggest to your renters to have insurance on their stuff, if Lord forbid something should happen. Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
And
do you require that, Peter, or do you just suggest it?
I require it. I do require it. All my tenants, and certainly anyone that has an animal, absolutely must cover me with liability on that animal.
Oh, yeah, that would make sense, because law forbid, especially certain breeds,
It doesn't matter what the breed is.
yeah, it's true. It's true, because the funny thing is, people are worried about Rottweilers and pit bulls, and the most vicious dogs statistically are your Labradors and your Labradoodles and your little foo-foo dogs. Those are the ones that attack more than
But
pits
see,
and
it's not,
Rottweilers.
the liability is not from attacks. The liability is from the lady tripped over the little itty bitty dog.
Oh, yeah, yeah, true.
And she fell, and she spent 6.5 weeks in the hospital trying to protect her pregnancy. And that was a $500,000 bill.
Yes, yeah.
Guy went to visit one of my tenants. The tenant had a big dog, nice dog. Dog jumped up on him, not in an attack, just jumped up, put his paws on his chest and knocked the man over. See, those are the kind of things. It's not just you look at this dog and you say, good grief, that dog's not coming in my house. It says in the event there's an animal, there's a liability involved, and it's craziness not to have the liability. Now that's my feeling. But indeed, I'm finding the tenants who used to argue about getting a liability addition to their tenants' homeowners are very happy to do it. And when I talk with them, I tell them whether they rent from me or not, they should do that if they're going to insist on living with an animal.
And Rosemary, the insurance you're referring to, renter's insurance, and I'm just going to share it with you real quick. I have a clause in my lease, and this is renter's insurance policy. Leaseor, that's me, does not carry insurance that covers contents of the demised premises. See, our insurance covers the property. It does not cover the contents, right? So, or insurance that covers negligence by lessee or that of lessee's employee, family, agent, visitor, etc. Therefore, lessee should get a renter's insurance policy for such purposes. And I explain that to them, and I tell them, I'm not going to force you to get it, but I strongly encourage you to get it. I understand it's very, very cheap. Now they know, and then it's up to them what they do, but I'm not covering their contents.
Oh, yeah, and I get, because I rented before, and I had renter's insurance. Yeah. Because, like you said, you're only covering your property and your personal.
Right. Well, renter's insurance, by the way that it works, does not cover contents. That's part of what makes it a little cheaper than a standard policy. But yeah, so.
But you got another thing. If they have an animal, they must add the liability rider to it. And I've only got 3 tenants now with dogs, but each of them has a tenant policy with a $500,000 liability rider. And they're 3 different. I think they're like Geico and Allstate and State Farm. And I don't know that those are the 3, but they're literally 3 different insurers. And so it's not a hard thing to get today. And where it used to be, I got a lot of questions. Now I don't.
That's interesting. I didn't know that part though, but thanks for that tidbit. It's good to know.
We have.
I think, Pete, I have not required that in the past. I certainly, like Chris, have gone over it with my tenants, but I do have several that have pets. I like them to have pets because they stay longer. They can't go live anywhere else. Nobody else wants pets, so I'm fine with that. But now I think I'm going to add this to my world, that they must have that liability insurance on there. So thank you for that. I really didn't have that.
A couple of things. Number one is many of my friends have pet rent clauses. They charge $25 or $50, and people are stupid enough to pay that because they want to have a dog they can follow down the street with a bag picking up the dog's shit. It's just amazing. It is just amazing. The low self-esteem of people. But in any case, they can get that insurance and cover themselves. And so I want to have that. And I might be like Chris and say, I'm not going to force you. I am not going to rent to you unless you get it.
Liz, can I keep him? He's cool. Peter, can I keep you? Hey, listen, I must have low self-esteem because I have 2 little foo-foo dogs, but I love it though. I love it.
That's the name of my little foo-foo dog, is low self-esteem. That's my dog's name, in fact. So I'm okay with that. All right. Okay.
We have a question.
But remember, instead of pet rent, those people could buy insurance with that money. And I'd rather have the insurance than the extra 25 bucks.
For sure. It covers
Marlene,
you.
Marlene from Flagler Insurance told me a pet policy runs around $150 for the year.
Yep. And now, so, and what is the tenant's homeowner's policy? So is that another $250 or something? So it's $400 or $500. I don't think any of my people are paying $500 total for the tenant's homeowner and the pet rider.
It's important to make sure that you're covered on their policy as the additional insured, too.
Yeah. What I do, I always get it going in. Where I tend to fall down is not following up and making sure it's renewed. That's really something you need to have some kind of a checklist, because that's a place where I've slipped up, and I know others have slipped up and not checking to be sure they renew it.
Petscreening.com.
Yes.
If you go to that site, they keep track of it for you and send you a notification when their insurance has lapsed or their rabies shots have lapsed or whatever.
So you can babysit the dogs too. Great.
Yeah,
What was that website? Petsitting.com?
Petscreening.com. Fantastic site.
Thank you.
To me, the more important part than the actual pet part is they take the liability of me mistakenly asking the wrong question for a service animal. They ask those questions the right way, and I don't have to possibly be in trouble with fair housing. They ask those questions, and then they sort through who bought the $50 license online, and it's really a BS license. So that's one of my favorite parts about the site.
Yeah.
So Peter, and everybody, I want you to know that Greg Martin, who's one of our PCREIA members, he's on here tonight. Greg is going to be announcing the opening of his insurance company soon. So I'd love to get your piece on that. Greg, I think you put a little thing on there about notification of that. Tell us what you were saying over in the chat.
Yeah, hopefully my mic's a little better now.
Yeah,
If
good.
you're additional interest, additional insured, you should get a notice on the renewal, or if they cancel it, if they have your name and address on there, correct?
Yeah, I didn't say I didn't get noticed. I said I wasn't sufficiently organized. Sometimes
Fair enough.
But that's a good point. So if you're an additional assured on there, then you are going to get a notice about that. So unlike Pete, just look at your emails and answer them, and you'll be fine. You'll be able to look into it. Okay.
Hey, Greg, how much is that policy? I think my tenant said it was just over $100.
Yeah, so it depends. Like a lot of them will include it with the renter's insurance, the H4 policy, and then that cost will depend on how much personal property coverage they have, but it's usually cheap, like 150 to 250 a year for most of them I've seen. Some companies they'll exclude liability on that policy, and then you get that separate pet policy, and then it can depend on what type of animal it is and stuff like that. It can vary.
Hey,